Todo bien, gracias a Dios. De pie.
Eso veo que
Qué,
mucho
lás-
bien.
qué lástima que no podemos estar juntos
Sí.
en esta
Sí, sí.
discusión. Es terrible, ¿eh?
No tengo micrófono.
Para las
Qué,
mollejas.
qué, qué,
¿Ese
qué
tiene
lástima. O
micrófono?
sea, y Taná también.
Sí, tiene, sí. Bien.
Ya. Buenos días a todos.
Buenos
Saludos.
días.
Buenos días.
Gusto poder verlos nuevamente, a pesar
Gracias,
de esta
igualmente.
distancia.
Hola, Primitivo.
¿Cómo estás? Te ves muy bien, Primitivo.
Muy bien, aquí todos.
Un abrazo,
Alegre de ver
primitivo.
Dale, new message.
Natividad, mucho gusto.
Un abrazo desde Honduras. Pronto te visitaré por ahí.
Gracias, gracias.
Ahora está desactivada. No.
Come on.
Efectivo.
Días a todos y todas, un gusto verlos y saludarlos desde la oficina regional de la UPU en San José. Un
Buenos
abrazo
días, mi
a
querido
todos.
Néstor. Un abrazo.
Hola, Néstor.
¿Cómo
Buen día.
estás? ¿Cómo te ha ido, amigo?
Bien,
Hola.
gracias.
Cumpleañero, cumple hace poco el
Sí,
cumpleaños.
estaba de fin de semana de cumpleañero, así es que
Feliz cumple.
Felicidades,
Gracias.
Néstor.
Muy bendecido. Otro
Buenos días a
año más
todos.
de vida.
So good afternoon again from Post Europe. Just a question, does anybody know whether the YouTube link has been shared yet? The streaming link for those who wanted to follow the conference by YouTube.
Bhutan, this is Jandan. I think it has been shared because I saw my colleagues over here I think they are watching. I don't know.
Bueno, arrancamos.
Okay, then thank you for the feedback.
Bueno, buenos días a todos, buenas tardes a algunos y buenas noches a algunas otras latitudes. Mi nombre es Gerardo González, trabajo en el Correo de México y voy a estar como moderador de este conversatorio sobre la apertura de la UPU al sector postal ampliado. Previo a que arranquemos, la Secretaría General del UPAEP nos va a dar algunas instrucciones para pedir la palabra y para hacer algunos comentarios cuando sea el momento de hacer la plática entre todos los que vamos a estar aquí presentes. Le doy la palabra a la Secretaría General para que nos dé las instrucciones. Muchas gracias.
Muy buenos días para todas y todos. Es un gusto darles la bienvenida al primer conversatorio regional.
Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to welcome you to the first regional meeting organized by PUAS. Very briefly, I will tell you about how the procedure takes place with remote interpretation. First of all, right as from this moment, all microphones are silenced except that of the moderator. I will give the floor to the speakers as we go along. This meeting will be held in Spanish, and there is interpretation into English, French, and Russian. All participants have to select the language they prefer, the English, Spanish, French, or Russian channels. When you select this, you go to the globe icon at the bottom right of the screen. On that icon, you also have to select mute original audio to listen only to simultaneous interpretation in the desired language. In order to view the moderator, we suggest to select speaker view. Because there are more than 150 participants, we ask you to ask for the floor with the hand icon on the right of your screen, or to write your questions in the chat box, and these will be considered by the moderator of the meeting. As regards streaming participation, remember the access link was sent by email, and to make comments during the meeting, you have to have a Gmail account or YouTube account. The total duration is 4 hours. We will have a 10-minute break halfway through. Thank you for participating, and I'll give the floor to Ligia Samayoa, who will give the instructions in English.
It is a pleasure to welcome you to the first interregional discussion panel organized by the Postal Union, Spain, and Portugal. Just 1 second, because we're hearing one person. I think it's an interpreter. Okay. ¿Quién está hablando, perdón? Ok, gracias. Continúo. Sí. Oh. Okay. Sí, bueno, sorry. I'm going to briefly describe the participation procedure during the virtual meeting. In the first place, we highlight that from this moment, all the microphones are muted except for the moderator, who will give the floor to the panelists over the course of the agenda. The meeting is in Spanish, and there is simultaneous interpretation available in English, French, and Russian. All participants must select the language in which they wish to listen to the meeting, the audio channel English, Spanish, French, or Russian. To select a language, you just need to click on the interpretation icon, located in a toolbar at the bottom of the screen, on the right side. You also must select mute original audio to hear only the simultaneous interpretation in the desired language. For a better view of the moderator, panelists, and every person that takes the floor during the meeting, it is suggested that the participants point the mouse cursor over the window of the person speaking and select the option Speaker View. Given that there are more than 150 participants registered via Zoom, We kindly ask you to request the floor using the hand icon that appears on the right of your screens, or write your questions through the participant chat, and they will be taken into consideration by the moderator. Regarding the live streaming via YouTube, please keep in mind that the link was sent to your email, and if any person following this broadcast wish to make comments and/or questions during the meeting, they must log in through a Gmail account on YouTube. A total duration of 4 hours is foreseen, and the moderator will determine a 10-minute break. Thank you very much to everyone for attending this event. I will now pass the floor to Mr. Gerardo González in his capacity as moderator, and to the Secretary General of POST, Roberto Pavano Merchant.
Muchísimas gracias a la Secretaría General de la Unión Postal de las Américas, España y Portugal.
Thank you very much to the General Secretariat of the Postal Union of the Americas, Spain and Portugal. I will try to speak slowly because we have interpretation into English, French and Russian, and into English because of courtesy by the Post Secretariat. Post Europe, it will be in charge of French and Russian by courtesy of the RCC. Thank you very much for providing the possibility of holding this panel in different languages. So welcome to this interregional panel organized by the Postal Union of the Americas, Spain and Portugal. The purpose of this panel is to discuss the progress of the special task force appointed by the Council of Administration of the UPU as regards the topic of the opening of the UPU to the wider postal sector. This panel, which I think is a wonderful idea, that was made by the General Secretariat and particularly by Roberto Cavano, who invited us to this meeting. And this is in a casual environment. We are in an enormous meeting room at home. Feel free to have a coffee, tea, or mate. And this is addressed to the member countries and territories of the Union, as well as to the authorities of the postal family, as well as the delegations that will be participating in the UPU Congress to be held in Abidjan this year. We also count on the participation of all the restricted unions and of the International Bureau of the Universal Postal Union, representatives of the governments, embassies, regulators, and private sector and others. Welcome. Remember, this is just a meeting. We'll be stating different points of view. We'll be listening to the panelists, and this will not be a debate. We're not going to debate, discuss ideas. We're just going to listen to different positions and receive feedback on the knowledge and experience of the different members of the panel. So without further ado, let me give the floor to Roberto Cavana, Secretary General of the Postal Union of the Americas, Spain and Portugal. Welcome, Roberto. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the global postal family. Welcome. A while ago, dear Raj was saying something that is very important. Namely, we long to be together, to embrace, and because of the pandemic, we really have to use this option, which nevertheless is a very fraternal way of seeing one another and to feel the warmth of all that we perceive in every meeting we normally have. Now, as a result of the pandemic, I'd like to ask each one of you to consider a minute of silence of the friends and family members who have died as a result of COVID and because of the diseases they have suffered from this year, which has been such a complicated year as a result of the pandemic. So let's have 1 minute silence in honor of these people.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias a todos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much to everyone. Thank you for participating in this meeting, in this conversation. And I used conversation and not debate because the intention we have is to have a relaxed conversation on the big challenge we face, which is the possibility of opening the doors of the UPU to the wider sector. I'd like to thank the more than 200 participants who registered over this period of time, more than 41 countries who are present, the consultative committee at the UPU, the European Commission on Postal Regulation, the Conference of Express Companies of Latin America and the Caribbean, Euromed, Post Europe, RCC, Regional Commonwealth in the field of communications, APPU, the Postal Union of Asia Pacific, UPC, Postal Union of the Caribbean, the Pan-African Postal Union and the Universal Postal Union, and of course the Postal Union of the Americas, Spain and Portugal. The members of the panel, the candidates to the position of Director General of UPU, who have never denied their presence to events organized by PUAS, the ambassadors, our moderator and dear friend Gerardo Gonzalez of Mexico Post, the representatives of the government, the regulators, the public and private operators, the observers, the interpreters, my PUAS team, and each one of you for honoring us with your presence. Definitely, there is no doubt at all that here we are gathered, those of us who really love the postal sector, those of us who seek to unite and not to separate anyone in the postal sector. The amount of people and agencies that are present today highlight the importance of this event. They highlight the concern and the interest of analyzing the proposal of opening the UPU to the wider sector. And it highlights most of all that it is the member countries that have the final decision of opening the doors to the wider sector. This is no new proposal. This is a proposal that has been discussed for many, many years. However, we haven't found a final reply to this. It is our obligation as restricted unions to open spaces of conversation on topics that are relevantly for the postal worldwide. It is not us who have voice and vote to decide. We just facilitate in the sense of providing more knowledge to our countries. We have to open these spaces of a conversation, providing the largest amount of information possible to the member countries. We have the obligation of providing to our countries this information with enough time so that they can study it, analyze it, and then decide, and not provide valuable information at the last minute. It is the obligation of reaching the UPU Congress with sufficient knowledge and wisdom to be able to make these proposals and to decide on these proposals. Nobody owns the absolute truth. We have preferences, we have aspirations, we are convinced of what we might wish. However, we all have a common wish, and this is to improve the world postal service, to respond to our customers in the best way possible, and to provide quality services. We will be organizing a second meeting, which will be organized with sufficient time so that the member countries have all the information possible and first-hand information. I don't want to take up more time for all of us, for all the restricted unions present today who are concerned about improving UPU and the postal service. We'd like to give you the warmest welcome and wish you from the bottom of our heart that this panel will be a success in terms of information, wisdom, discovery, and of other positions, and above all, of union of the global postal sector. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Secretary General, for your welcoming words and to highlight that this is a conversation. Each one of us will be expressing our ideas and positions without having a debate. This is a discussion among friends to deepen on this topic. I will now would like to introduce the first speaker today, Jack Hamad, co-chair of the Special Task Force of the opening of the UPU. He has a degree in sales and marketing at the Belgian School of Business and a master's degree from the Free University of Brussels. He is also candidate to the Director General of the UPU International Bureau and has experience in business management of both public and private agencies. The responsibilities of Mr. Haman have increased over the years, particularly regarding international strategies, regulation, innovation, and business development. In 2007, he joined Cisco, focusing on the new technologies applied to different sectors, including logistics and the postal sector. 2 years later, he joined the public sector as General Director for Development in the federal government of Belgium. And in September 2013, he joined the Belgian Postal Services and Telecommunications Agency, where he chaired the council until January 2017, when he was appointed member of the Postal Services. I will now give the floor to him, and we'd like allow Jack Hamad to share his screen so he can please make his presentation. Welcome, Jack.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. I just want to make sure that you can hear me very well.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Then, of course, for the people knowing me from the CA, I will make a bit the discussion a bit difficult for the interpreters. And thank you very much to be so kind with me, because, as my friend said, it's a challenge to follow me in French. It's a challenge to follow me in English, and it might be a challenge to follow me in Spanish. You will see I have a tie today, because my kids told me today, then where are you going, Dad? I say I will travel the world. And thank you very much, UPAEP, for the organization of this interregional session. Buenos días a todos. Qué bueno verte de nuevo.
Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see you again.
Gracias por la oportunidad de presentar una actualización del grupo de trabajo.
An update on the task force work. This is a very important topic. The next Congress will mark the path in the future. Let us not lose this opportunity of discussing this issue together in the spirit of constructive dialogue. The regions have been dealing with this topic, and I'm pleased to see that the members are becoming involved. And if there are differences in the different points of view, and if there are different expectations, the intention is to take into account that it is you, the UPU members, the ones who will decide what UPU will do tomorrow.
Today's intervention does not necessarily represent my position as a candidate to the position of Director General. I thank all the members of PUESP for your work and for the contributions made so far.
And now, if you allow me, I will switch in English. And will share my screen. Please be so kind to confirm that you see my screen.
Yes, we can see you, Jack. Thank you.
Mhm. Okay. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excuse me, do you hear me?
Yes, Jack, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Very clear.
Yes, we can hear you.
Excuse me, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
sorry.
Go ahead.
Then please show me, if you doesn't mind, show me your finger if you see the presentation, and then I kick off immediately.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Then, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the time you allow me today to present this presentation, which is an official presentation from the task force. But allow me to remind that there is already an history, as Roberto said and Gerardo just earlier. The opening of the UPU is not a new story. Let's remind you that regarding the preamble of the Constitution and following Article 1, we are recalling the mission of the Union, which is to stimulate the lasting development of efficient and accessible universal postal service of quality in order to facilitate communication between the inhabitants of the world. By a number of things, by adopting and encouraging common standards, using of technology, by getting sure that there is free circulation of postal items over a single postal territory, composed of interconnected networks, ensuring cooperation and interaction among stakeholders, and that's very important to remind, promoting effective technical cooperation, and of course, thinking, as Roberto said in his introduction, thinking of course about the customers, the users in general. Of course, those articles are referring to a framework which is obviously known by all of you, which is this single territory working with reciprocal. I think that someone, Fernando, is requesting the control of my screen, but I will decline. Then reciprocal subject of course, a number of regulations and so on described. The journey of the UPU to wider postal sector is obviously not a new subject. It started from 1999 in Beijing, and even earlier with a number of discussions about the opening up of the UPU. And from time to time, the opening was already started. The journey in 2004 until 2016 was mainly creating, of course, the consultative committee. But there were also a number of resolutions taken in 2012 and 2016 related to the opening of the UPU product and services by the UPU to other players. In 2018 and 2019, during the Extraordinary Congress, there were a lot of intentions and discussion about it. And as from 2019, with the creation of the task force, there was a certain level of acceleration. I would like to remind you, just to make sure, because it's sometimes when we discuss between the members, it seems that members require on a regular basis to get a recall and a recap on what was already done or what is ongoing. I just want to stop 1 second on the Congress resolution C10 2016. In this resolution, it was agreed that the UPU should systematically review and open up categories of products most likely to be of interest to wider sector players. In this context, the CA and mainly the CAC2 Commission was discussing about the main principle for the access policy. Allow me to recap that quickly, not willing to take too much time today about that, but we talk about integrity and interdependence. We talk about reciprocity of interconnection, no unfair advantage, wider postal sector payment and discussion, demonstrated need for those services, clear distribution of the role and responsibilities, and the last two about the proper security mechanism related to all of that, and a transparent management, control, and integration of the supply chain. Those principles were discussed during CA sessions, referring to a resolution of the Congress C10 2016, and the product and services identified as priorities offered to wider sector players were mainly IPS, Post.net Mail, IFS.Post, Post.net Finance, PPS Clearing, CDS.Post Supply Chain, UPU Clearing System, and .Post Solution. If you look on the slide on the right side, you will see that the prioritization we're mentioning in the document of the CA and discussion between the members that there were a number of items and directions. First of all, what were the characteristics of those products? What were the legal basis and current access policies of those products? What could be, or what were the existing stakeholders? What could be the future stakeholders, including potentially non-DOs, obviously. Those discussions and those items were on a regular basis discussed at the CA. Then if we move on in the history, if you looked from September 2019 up to today, we went through a number of steps. One of the first steps starting September 2019 was the decision, of course, and the trigger that there were, of course, a number of members issuing a number of requests and expectations from the UPU on several subjects. Obviously, terminal dues and the discussion around, but there was also other subjects maybe less visible. And it was decided in November 2019 that the task force was supposed to present a number of results to the CA and work during few months. With, of course, at once upon a time that we were thinking to have a Congress in 2020, the task force was doing step by step a number of questionnaire sent to the members, and then the task force work was extended a first time, studies and collection of stakeholders' input were done, and a second questionnaire was done, and so on, to land in December 20 at the last CA to present a report which was not necessarily reflecting an agreement of all the members, but it was an attempt to summarize the work of a lot of actions which were done, a lot of input which were received from the different members. Then, in other words, there was ongoing discussion by iteration about the opening, and the discussion were accelerating. Of course, I don't have to remind that the COVID crisis was affecting the working of the task force, and especially for this type of very sensitive subject. Not having the opportunity to have a physical meeting is seriously an issue. Why do we need physical meeting for such a subject? Because those subjects like terminal dues, when we had to discuss it, when we had to discuss about the reform of the UPU, those meetings require formal and informal discussion, inside and outside the room discussions, and outside in discussion. Nevertheless, respectfully to the all members, and again, as I said, there is no agreement with the report as presented by the task force, the CA took notice of the report and asked the task force to continue the work. Then, as from January 2021, a circular was inviting all the members, as decided during the CA of December, to send comments on the proposal contained in the report of the task force and provide any suggestions for improvement on specific areas, and obviously to propose potentially a number of things they would like to highlight in terms of contributions to the work of the task force. We have until April 2021 to come back to the next CA with a new report and all conclusions and all agreements. I cannot tell you today where do we land, and I'm so happy to see today that we are more than 100 representatives, thank you very much, UPAEP, to be discussing about this important subject. And as we know, all the region are discussing about it. Then the work of the task force was past and current works, benchmark, and stakeholders' contributions were considered. What you see on this slide is the combination. There were multiple questionnaires, there were multiple inputs, there were also a high-level forum with expression, there were also input directly from countries to the IB, just not to mention few of them. For example, the CC, the Consultative Committee itself, Indonesia Initiative, and all United States Chamber of Commerce, and many others like Germany and so on and so on. Then in other words, the combination of all these elements were a rich source of information based on all the inputs of those countries. Then allow me now to have a look a bit further into the input received from the members. Obviously, we can discuss about the quality of the questionnaire, we can discuss about the timing and so on and so on. But let's try to have a positive view on what happened. The first step, which was provided on February 2020, was the task force on opening up the UPU to wider stakeholders players with a report which was the result of questionnaires sent to all members of the UPU. More than 200, if I'm right, I remember well, 200 contributions were done regarding this questionnaire, with obvious questions. Are you yes or no for opening? It looks a complex question and at the same time an easy question. And of course, when you ask the question to members, you have to say and to know to what you say yes or no. This is why from time to time, the task force was progressing with questionnaire, going further and further into those detailed questions about simply yes and no, but why yes and why no, and what about yes and what about no. Then in the questionnaire, addressed to a lot of different members, it has been available to the task force members. And of course, there were requests for more time and so on and so on. And in this first iteration, maybe not all the members took the opportunity to provide a feedback. But nevertheless, what you see on the small graph down this slide is that there were, of course, a number of key findings. First of all, this topic is relevant for all the regions. We got response from all the regions. We got response from governments, regulators, but also from external stakeholders like private sectors and others. And there were obviously a number of questions where we already got a number of interesting input. One of them is obviously who could be the types of players to be joining the UPU in priorities. If you see, and maybe it's too small, but just to give you an example, in the top 5 of those categories of players seen by the respondent to be the one to join the UPU were obviously the partners, airlines company, custom organizations. But also, starting from 3, 4, and 5 in the priority list, the other players like couriers company, logistic service providers, and e-retailers. The second important input in terms of, let's say, interesting thing, it was how and which category of stakeholders should be created. Then during this first phase of the questionnaire, there were a number of suggestions made by members about how to cluster those member categories and who to create them. There were also already a first level of input regarding clarification how those stakeholders could fit into which of the categories. And there were also a first input on the details on products and services to be opened up. And there were, of course, and that's very important, a lot of comments, which were also taken into account in the summary report that was provided to the CA. Then the survey which was launched to all the members was already a good step forward. After the CA session, the CA extended again the mandate of the task force. Another questionnaire came up, and it was divided mainly on two categories and based on all the input already received from previous session. And I was mentioning questionnaire, input directly from members, it was from history, and so on and so on. And they were also discussed a bit at the high-level forum. The purpose of the questionnaire was to divide the things in two pieces. One, it was to learn from the other organization. What makes us so different? What makes us so unique? What makes us equal to others? And it was mainly a question about benchmarking UPU versus other international organizations. And the second pillar of this questionnaire was try to address what we already identified in the first part of the study. I mean the first part of the journey of the task force, which means the questionnaire and so on. And a number of dimensions were identified. Dimension 1 are to talk about the member categories, as I said. 2, which stakeholders to allocate to which categories. And what is the eligibility, that's the third, about every type of products and services to be accessible, open, in other words, to the existing members, and under which conditions. Discussing specific rights and obligations to those members' categories, if we define more of them. Furthermore, what are the financial conditions to discuss about them? How potentially to adapt UPU structure to welcome those new members? And of course, what would be the amendments and the legal framework change to be adopted to allow that? And last but not least, the implementation of those decisions. I don't have to say and to tell you that, of course, the task force was collecting the information. There were a number of discussions, respectfully to all the members. It was not a full agreement. It was quite a challenging exercise to perform regarding that. Then allow me to give you some examples of the input region by region. Let's have a look to Asia. And this is an example of one country from Asia. And I don't want to quote them, it's just for the purpose of an example. This country respectfully suggested to have 3 categories of members. You will see even, and if you don't, I will comment, you will see that this member from Asia was grouping governments, regulators, and DOs in one single category. And the second category was mainly about all the ecosystem regarding the postal sector, including manufacturers and partners and so on, and non-members being the union. If you look as an example, the country from Asia was mentioning that those partners could have access to potentially everything, subject to a number of conditions, but potentially to everything, and for example, not having access to sharing roles, with the exception of user-funded subsidiary bodies, no specific sharing capabilities for those other categories than the one which is member countries. Just to give you an example about what country could say. Another example from Europe, for example. Europe members, it's also a diversity into the input. Again, one of the European, when I say European, it's European extended region, was reporting that again, governments, regulators, and DOs could be and fit into one category. And this country was proposing associated members and sector members and sponsoring members. And what you will see pending the association and so on, they were grooming the companies into categories and sometimes in multiple categories, and sometimes giving multiple access to products and services depending those categories. Just to quickly to move to Africa, one of the African countries was creating 4 members categories. Once again, what is very interesting is that governments, regulators, DOs were clustered in the same category, which is member, and then they proposed to create 3 other categories, mainly members of the sector, associated members, and university, for example. If you have a look, for example, to terminal dues access, sorry, this is in French, then I already disclosed something, it's French-speaking African country, you will see that they were proposing, for example, which is in their contribution, to have the opening and access to payment system to all categories members. And for example, to IT computer system, a partial access depending which type of services to those categories. And finally, if I take an example of UPAEP region, this is another example of another member which was creating not 2 or 3 or 4, but in this case 5 member categories. I didn't go to the 7 because I see, Gerardo, that you are smiling, and I will not make everybody sleeping, especially respectful to my friends from Asia. But I just want to mention, for the purpose of the explanation today in discussion, that what is very interesting is that we were facing a larger number of member categories, and what we had in terms of access, it was yes or no partial access to those products and services, but related to terms and conditions, and for example, only if you pay for it. Then this is very interesting to know that in all the contributions, and that's the main message, all the contributions we got from the different countries, it was a spectrum of discussion. Then the report of the task force, and thank you very much for UPAEP Secretariat, was to invite all the members to read carefully the report as presented at the CA. Because of course this report, even if no final consensus was reached, and there were quite a lot of information in this report. First of all, and as I said in my introduction, and I hope correctly in Spanish, and I will repeat in English, of course I'm not here acting as a candidate, I'm not talking for Belgium, I'm just here in my neutral position of task force co-chair. You see that on the report, do we go for 2, for 3, for 5 categories of stakeholders? In the task force report, the work was to try to collect and to groom and to cluster them on 3 categories. The task force tried to identify what was so special to keep and what was in common so far possible. And again, no agreement. Then I do not say that is the truth. It's just an attempt to try to help for the discussion. Then what you have in eligibility of access and product and services in the report is that there were access proposal, and I remind the first category was members countries, they have access to everything, this is green. For the sector members, it's not agreed, but it's grouping and clustering the postal sector players in general and the other associated members, associating the different categories of partners like airlines and so on. And what has been done in the report is try to make the difference between 3 types of accessibility or rights granted to those categories. 1, full eligibility, I think it's clear. Partial or conditional access means that its access to those solutions would be possible, but only partially, if certain conditions to be defined by the UPU bodies were met. Then in other words, when you see yellow on those tables, it means that it's clearly partially or conditional access. And red, it is mainly access to the solution would not be possible to the corresponding membership categories. Then if you look what is specific in those tables, of course, is that you will see yellow. One of the key things to take away is that in the report of the task force, it was clearly mentioned that it should be a specific committee dedicated to DOs and especially to universal services and related matters. I just want all of the members today to understand that it was recognized in the report that it was important to keep it separate. And of course, a number of other services to be, let's say, partially accessible upon conditions to be defined. And last but not least, in the task force proposal, it was, of course, to identify what should have been done or what should be done in the future to allow those changes in the framework of the UPU, General Regulation Act, and so on and so on. Then I tried, and again, take it as a free interpretation of the input received from a large community of stakeholders and contributions. I think we can say that the spectrum of input received by the contributors was spread in 4 types of approach. One, statu quo, means please do nothing. Just do nothing. It's already doing something. Do nothing. Then in other words, the opening effect, it's 0. There is no change. The second thing, which what you know, as I said, it's a partial consultative committee reform. Then in other words, just to recall what members were proposing, you can add more members in the consultative committee. In other words, organization change is low, the impact on current working is low, and the decision process, including new members, it's quite low because it's just extending a bit the membership of the consultative committee. But there was also a proposal, and this is very important because in a lot of contributions, there are sometimes what I call hybrid approach, means stepped approach. And in step approach, there were proposals about more progressive reform of the consultative committee. And it's where I would like to bring the attention that the spectrum of contributions from the members is quite large. Allow me to explain it. The most progressive reform of the CC is definitely a bit more organization change. When you hear me, maybe potentially some people will say, no, there is no change, it's just adding something. No, in the proposal, which was very interesting, into, let's say, the most progressive reform of the CC, it was also impacting the current working of the union. Why? Because it was giving a certain level of power, which can be described in different levels, about the working of the UPU itself. For example, in some proposal, there were, let's say, intentions, for example, to ask POC and OCA to ask advice to the CC prior to any decision. Other proposals were that the CC could file directly proposal to the CA and potentially to the Congress. Then in other words, the impact on current working, if you introduce flow of decision and consultation within the organization, it's obviously having an impact on the functioning of the current UPU. But also on the decision process, because if you get mandatory consultation, mandatory advice, and or proposals to be submitted by the CC directly to POC or to CA or to Congress, it might obviously affect the way of working. Last but not least, there were quite discussion about what has been the report, because the CA name and the POC name has been changed in Executive Council and Business Council. I will say, for the people really familiar with the UPU history, I think that Executive Council was the previous name after the Second World War of the CA, and I think that the Business Council is just changing the name. But of course, in the reform, we have to be very careful, because this is another approach to the opening, and this opening is, I will say, a more, let's say, extended change into the organization, because you add stakeholders into the working of POC, for example. It's an impact, obviously, on the current working, but the difference is that the working within the POC, if you have new members, they can discuss immediately. And in comparison with the CC, you do not have consultation process way and back. They have potentially, depending the rights, obligations, accessibility granted to specific product and services or committees, there will be, of course, the different impacts in the current working organization, and obviously in the decision process, pending the rights and obligations, it will be different in terms of, let's say, decision process. If the new members are getting clear membership categories with clear rights and obligations, you can have them in POC, or you can have them in the CC, and of course, depending the power that you will give to the CC and or POC and those numbers, it will affect, of course, the decision process of the whole organization. Then, in other words, my message here is that obviously those inputs are very interesting because they are showing that there are a number of different options to be discussed between the members regarding those approach, with a number of benefits and, of course, challenges. Then what will be the next step on the task force? The next step on the task force in terms of structure is not to say that the report of the task force is correct or not correct. It's just to say that along the journey of talking about the UPU opening to wider stakeholders, it's always the same subject. This is why a conference call was organized with the task force members to try to see how we can move on with the discussion around the opening in the best way. Not necessarily saying to the members, this is the right approach, but just structuring. As I said just earlier, what the member categories we need, what is the structure we prefer, do we have already an obvious direction of the product and services to be open to stakeholders? And I can tell you that in the contributions we got from all the regions and members, there are quite clear expression mentioned by we should start with those products and services, we should go by steps, or we should allow this membership to access this and this and this, as I told you before. Then this is why, as from now and after we end the consultation by calling input on the report of the CA beginning of January, what will happen, we received until today about 15 contributions of different quality on the subject of the report of the task force to the CA. The purpose of the plan work is to work on the roadmap to try to connect all the members together into those specific pillars. Not saying that we will already define the landing points regarding how we will arrive in which type of compromise we might land in April, but try to structure the discussion by iteration about a number of cluster dimensions, membership categories, organization design, and so on and so on. Try to go a bit more in details about what exactly the members are really open to do, how to do, what to do, with who, at what conditions, and so on and so on. And then to land in April, hopefully, with a new detailed report, so far possible with one or more proposals, and I will make a comment on that, and obviously what might be the amendments to the act which are required to allow such an opening. What I can tell you today is that, as we heard from the terminate dues discussion, we clearly hope, not hope, we clearly expect, sorry about that, we clearly expect that we'll probably have several proposals or no proposals. But if we have several proposals, it will be on a spectrum of different approach as I described earlier in my slides. Then, in other words, from nothing to POC reform and maybe through CC step-by-step reform. Then, in other words, that the purpose today is to try to bring all the views together. I'm very happy about today, and repeating myself, that the task force is really grouping a number of 25 countries representing their regions. And what I really hope from the members of the task force representing their regions is that, of course, they can cascade, pull and push the messages in an efficient and effective way to make sure that we are all connected together in a constructive, open and transparent dialogue. Then, in other words, Gerardo, what is my key final message on this first part of the presentation? And I think I will stop there, but of course I prepared a very deep dive of the report if the members today on the call would like to do. I would like to say the first things we need to do is to listen. I think that what is very, very key in this process, as the UPU members' family did perfectly in the past, was to listen each other. The second thing, which is very important, is to understand each other wish, expectations, concerns, and sometimes fear. What is about the opening may affect significantly the functioning of the sector, significantly affect the DOs, and this is why we need to be very careful by evaluating every scenario which should be done for the purpose of having a good approach, which of course will fulfill all the requirements, expectations from everybody. And to make sure that we will, of course, and I know that in some case we don't like this word, but just to make sure that we are not doing things that afterwards governments, designate operators, postal sector players, and more important, citizens, society in general, will suffer off. And last but not least, listening, understand, evaluate, and so on, and having the spirit of compromise. I just want to say, this is your UPU. This is not the task force UPU. This is yours. And it's up to you to decide. In the opportunity of a Congress, this is a momentum. You have the opportunity to do what would you like to do. Then thank you very much for this time. Hopefully I was not making you falling asleep. Muchas gracias for your time and your listening. I stop here. Of course, there is a second part if you would like to go in details, but I think at this time I can stop for first interactions. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias por tu presentación.
Thanks a lot for your presentation, Jack. That was very interesting. Jack, the task force for the opening of UPU has been very concise. It summarizes a year and a half's work, and the work has been ongoing since Beijing Congress 1999. If I'm not wrong, you're going to give another presentation, or would it be the turn of the next panelist? Is your presentation right away, or is somebody else speaking?
I have a second part of the presentation. I have a second part, but it is much more detailed into the proposal itself. And again, Gerardo, I will be happy to continue to go through the details. I think they are important, but I just want to make sure that it's relevant for all of you to continue or not. I'm available for what you would like to do.
Estamos un poco cortos de tiempo.
We're rather short of time. I think that we should go on with the next panelist so that we won't go behind. So if you have no problems, if you are happy with that, Jack, I will give the floor to the next panelist who will talk about the potential scope of the opening and the perspective of the different stakeholders given that opening. I'm going to give the floor to Jorge Aldana, who is a consultant of the UPU and the POESP. He is a facilitator in Latin America in the project for the operative preparation for e-commerce implemented jointly with UPU and PUASP in Latin America, and he has conducted operational reviews in Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Guatemala, and Bolivia. He worked for 32 years in the Mexican Postal Service, where he worked in systems area, postal development, international operations, and international affairs. There has been a problem in the Council of Administration, and he was worked in POESP. He has
y estudios sobre el servicio postal universal, proceso de...
He has worked on the process of reform and the management of postal items. He's a mechanical engineer, graduated at the Autonomous University of Mexico, in addition to being a specialist and expert in international affairs in Madrid. He speaks Spanish, English, and German, and he's been a professor at the University of Mexico. He's a great postal expert, believe me. So, I'm going to give the floor to Jorge, who will please take the floor. Jorge. Thank you, Gerardo, for your words. I asked Fernanda whether they're going to show the presentation. Well, let me start by thanking Roberto Cabana for this invitation to participate in this meeting. To give the idea a bit of an outsider, I don't work for any DOs or any regulators. I see things different. I just heard Jack's excellent presentation, and to tell you the truth, it's an incredible work that they've done.
De la Unión Postal Universal me tocó vivirlo desde que ingresé yo al...
Well, ever since I started working for the Mexican Post, a little later, after I started to work there, we had the Hamburg Congress. They adopted a resolution that at the time was incredible. They invited all the member countries to enforce the postal monopoly. That was in 1984. In 1989 in Washington, the first day, the opening day, symbolically, the people of the managers of the private companies wanted to go in, and they said that you had to open to the private. The delegates, we were all representing our posts and the public, and the people of governments of all the countries. We were absolutely flabbergasted. How could the private sector intend to attend these meetings? But then in 1989, things have changed, because the delegations did not just have people of the posts, but the delegations had people of the regulatory bodies, the ministries, not just the ministry in charge, and in some cases representatives of private couriers. So the world had changed. So those of us working in the post have changed, but what actually changes is society and its requirements. For 1999 already, an important group of countries demanded the opening of the UPU to the private sector. Of course, there was not a majority, so what they got was to be able to create a high-level group, and here is Mercedes Bassi, who was part of that high-level group, and the 2001, the Council of Administration, they created the consultative group that would include the interested parties.
At the Bucharest Congress, the name was changed, and it became the Consultative Committee. This held its first meeting in 2005 during the POC. At the Bucharest Congress, this was the change. In 2005, the first meeting included more than 200 members, and it was such a successful story that the member countries were invited to consider the number of participants because they didn't even fit into the big meeting room. In 2012, the Doha Congress invited other players. At the Istanbul Congress, they approved the resolution in this regard. At Addis Ababa, the same thing happened until the 2019 Extraordinary Congress and the task force. The consultative committee then now has 14 members, and the task force produced a report which we just heard about by Jack Amand. This list includes the products and services offered by the currently by the UPU. These are for events and meetings, international treaties and agreements, settlement mechanisms, and a whole list that was produced by the task force. These are the products and services offered by the UPU. These are all very valuable for those of us who are operators. Now we ask ourselves, is this enough for the wider sector? This slide shows the following. The UPU was created in 1874, one country, one post. The post belonged to the government. Now currently, in one country, we have a designated operator. In some cases, it can be more than one designated operator, and multiple operators, private operators. We still continue having a single postal territory and a world postal network. Now, many things happened in between. The industrialized countries, using the classification terms that's still used, they have very high postal volumes. The designated operators have a very high market share or even a reserved area for basic services. In practice, there is a basic postal services operator. Now, in developing countries, there are low postal volumes compared to the industrialized countries. The designated operators, except for some cases, have a very low market share, and there are multiple basic postal services operators. There are many offering basic postal services. At present, we have some things that were clearly described in the task force report. The universality of the UPU has enabled the growth of e-commerce, which has led to the entry of new postal operators. We thought that some developing countries would take a long time to incorporate e-commerce. However, in developing countries, many posts closed down the operation and did not participate in the development of e-commerce. Then the designated operators have a dominant position in the letter post market, an average of 72.8% of the internal traffic. Now, these numbers are the world average, and most of all, these are increasing thanks to the development in the developed countries, industrialized countries. In the developing countries, the designated operators have a much lower market share compared to the world average. In some regions, for instance, with some exceptions, the designated operator has a marginal market share.
En algunas regiones, por ejemplo, la versión
in
mercado.
some regions, the market share varies on the type of item. In the parcel post market, this is quite complicated for developing countries. So as a consequence, In many countries, the designated operators have not been the leader in the postal market in that country. This in terms of value and in volume. The monopoly era of one country, one post, when member states relied on a single designated operator, is over in many countries. Now, there is a growing participation of private operators or consolidation companies in the countries of origin, and this has given rise to the use of private operators as delivery agents in the destination country. And this began with M's and also happens with small parcels. The increase in terminal dues has made delivery of small parcels very profitable. And they are hiring private operators for that kind of item. And this is understandable because they want to preserve their clients. Another thing is sending direct dispatches to the destination DOs as cargo or through ETOs. There are even private operators that resort to these ETOs. At the top of this slide, we have the designated operators sending the postal items to the destination country, both letter, post, whichever the formats. These are postal items and are ruled by the Universal Postal Convention, the Universal Postal Network. Now, some designated operators also sending directly dispatches to private operators. These are no longer of the World Postal Network. Private operators are also sending things directly to the designated operators at the destination country. And the consolidating agencies are also sending dispatches to the designated operators or to private operators. And the rest are considered cargo, and then the Universal Postal Convention is not applied. So this is the segment that is growing day by day, and letter post or small parcel is no longer considered post and is considered cargo and is not covered by the Universal Postal Convention. So this is handled as cargo at the country of destination. For example, if an item cannot be delivered, then it has to be returned to origin. But the consumer, the addressee, has less rights because the international treaty only covers the higher parts, the higher tier. The rest don't fall under the Universal Postal Network, and that's the big risk of the Universal Postal Union. I don't see this as a sports club where we discuss things whether they can have access to the swimming pool or to the different areas or what is the fee they have to pay. The UPU, when it was created, regulated the exchange of international items. Currently, there are postal items that are no longer postal items, although they do not use UPU documents. These are handled outside the Universal Postal Network, and that is the opening that I think is the most important one. How can we include these items or dispatches in the global postal network so that consumers can be protected in accordance with the international treaties that the countries signed. And I think that is a major challenge we face, and not to consider something as cargo when it is in fact a postal item. So this means that every day the volume of items that does not use the World Postal Network or is not regulated by the Universal Postal Convention is increasing. So Universal Postal Convention is applied in lesser and lesser cases, particularly when we speak of developing countries. Can you put up my presentation on the screen again, please? Just a second, Jorge. Okay. In several countries, the international volume is the main income, particularly incoming international mail coming from Asian countries. In the case of EMS, of express items, many designated operators from industrialized countries have contracted the services of private operators in the country of destination. I'm aware that this depends on each region. And speaking with people from the European Union, they don't understand this because designated operators exchange things with one another. But in some regions, there is a strong interest in the opening because of the interconnection between operators, including private operators. And this is the major problem we have today, namely to have access to products such as IPS, technical standards. This is of great importance. And all the messages, pre-dis, justice, and so on. But this is only being used by the designated operators. Now we have to see how we can incorporate this so that all dispatches can be postal items and can be covered by this. So the topic of greatest interest is the opening to the reception of international items coming from private operators under the regulation of the UP Convention. Now, this opening would put some designated operators in serious troubles. We have to handle this with caution, with a very important roadmap. The important here is to preserve the World Postal Service, the Universal Postal Service, which is what makes us unique. In other words, basic services provided in the countries. Now, the importance of including these dispatches would make this relevant, but not just because of that, but rather that the inhabitants of each country can have access to quality and modern postal services, protecting the interests of the postal service consumers. I think that the postal operators really have to comply with this universal postal service. When the UPU was created, we considered what happened at that time, but now we see how many dispatches don't fall, are outside, handled outside this network. So if changes are implemented, these have to be made gradually. We have to have a roadmap protecting things we already have. If this opening includes the participation of private operators, then the member countries must extend this obligation to monitor compliance with the Universal Postal Convention and its regulations to private operators. This is Article 22 of the UPU Constitution. Unfortunately, I have seen that in many countries, regulators do not monitor this. And if private operators can then do postal dispatches, we have to really control this for all operators so that we can ensure that the Universal Postal Network continues to exist. And I insist that the most important thing, and I have visited many developing countries and in other continents, I realize that Universal Postal Service continues being a dream in many countries.
Universal Postal Service is the raison d'etre of the designated operator. So I insist we nearly need to take that into account. But really the most important problem is postal interconnection between the different operators, including the private sector. That's the only way that UPU may continue to be relevant and for the benefit of consumers of the postal services. Thank you. Gerardo, I give you back the floor. Thank you, Jorge. Thank you for your presentation. And because you gave us food for thought outside the box from the perspective of somebody who worked for the designated operator in Mexico, and to make us see things through a different perspective, and seeing how we could address this opening of UPU to the wider sector. Now we'll continue with the presentation, listening to the different players before the opening. I'm now going to give the floor to Mr. Walter Tresek, who started working in the postal industry over 30 years ago in his family company. And in the late 90s, he saw that the postal and the online world could be merged, and he opened a company that was a startup of the Silicon Valley. He was a senior. He was a very successful member of the different. He was invited to be part of Austria Post, and he reconstructed Austria Post. Starting in 2004, he started with the document exchange and with communication. He worked with communicationlogistics.com. He has chaired the working groups at the Austrian standards at the European level, and acting as liaison officer in European postal standardization to the UPU. He plays an active role as chairman of the CN and New Digital Postal Services in setting the standards and determining the future of environment in which European hybrid will work, the secured electronic postal services and e-commerce as part of global network industries. In 2013, he was elected executive board member of AS, where he advises the Austrian government on infrastructure and technical regulation policies as presidential advisor. In 2015, he was invited to become the vice chair of the e-commerce Europe's e-logistics working group and establish their participation as a member of the UPU's consultative committee. Today, he chairs the consultative committee of the UPU, so I'm going to recognize Walter for his presentation. Go ahead, Walter.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for having me in this very distinguished panel. Ladies and gentlemen, I am the chair of the consultative committee, and you are all familiar, of course, that we underwent studies on how to transform the consultative committee already starting in 2017. So when I had the pleasure to be appointed the chairperson of the consultative committee, it became apparent quite fast to the members of the consultative committee that the consultative committee representing the postal stakeholders that are not public postal operators or regulators can add their voice to the UPU's deliberations through the consultative committee, but just adding their voice to the UPU's deliberations might not be enough and sufficient. The committee shall represent the interests of the wider postal stakeholders and shall provide a framework for effective dialogue. However, this is only possible if the members can actually participate in a very constructive way to facilitate, according to their needs, if they are the wider stakeholders, to develop the future of the union as such. It was already mentioned that we have 14 members. Yes, those are the 14 wider stakeholder members, which are multinational organizations, some of which are representing more than 100,000 wider stakeholders, such as E-Commerce Europe, for instance, which is the umbrella association of all e-commerce associations in Europe. So by saying that we only have 14 members, this is perhaps a little bit misguiding. In fact, we have 23 members, So the rest, the other 9 members, are actually designated operators or even member states of the UPU. So the consultative committee, as it stands today, gives a wide variety of member states, of designated operators, and also the wider stakeholders. That was the reason why we started looking into a possible transformation of the consultative committee to be more targeted and to add to the UPU's deliberations all the expertise we can bring to the union to transform it. We underwent certain studies and came to a transformation proposal which we tabled in 2020. We aligned it with the task force. We tried very hard to be a part of the task force. However, we were denied as the CA decided that only member states should be part of the task force. Let me perhaps go into a little bit of the transformation proposal. I'm quite sure most of you have read it. However, to highlight the main points of the transformation proposal presented by the consultative committee are: the consultative committee should become a council. It should be a standing body of the UPU. The consultative council then will purely exercise an advisory role, influencing and consultative role. The consultative council then shall not have any decision-making role vis-a-vis the UPU policy and regulatory frameworks. So no interference into what currently is handled in the CA by member states. The consultative council shall contribute to decisions through a new institutional instrument, the so-called consultative opinion. That opinion shall be considered by the CA and the POC making any decisions on related questions. So that opinion should be a voice heard from the wider stakeholders directly to the CA or the POC. The consultative committee council then would be able to make direct proposals to Congress unless those proposals are concerned questions under the direct competences either of the CA or the POC. And it should have a de jure participation extended to all CA and POC standing groups and task force. Why that? Well, because currently we can apply to be part in the working group. However, the chair can deny participation without any reasoning, and then nobody from the wider stakeholders can actually participate. This happens quite regularly. So in particular matters which are touching directly to the core of the business of the wider stakeholders, our members are not allowed in participating in working group meetings, even if they can participate or are willing to participate to the further considerations of the UPU. Such a participation then for this newly to be created consultative council shall limited only in exceptional cases, duly approved by the chairs of the CA, the POC after the consultation with the Secretary General of the UPU. So we would like to enable our members to participate in a very active role in the considerations of the UPU, however, through opinions, not in a decision power. There are many members already through our multinational organizations who could bring clear business proposals, clear alignments proposals to the table. We are currently trying that quite hard. In some working group, it works quite well to mention one. That's the POC C1 Standards Board, where we already participate in the meetings and are working rather closely with the Standards Board on certain standardization matters to the benefit, of course, to the wider stakeholders, including but not limited to the designated operators. When it comes to the membership, the proposal to transform the consultative committee is focusing on changing the membership of the consultative committee to just one category. So not designated operators, not member states, but what we call the non-state actors. These are all actors who are not member states or not designated operators. However, both the CA and POC shall designate one of its members to serve as a liaison to this newly established UPU Consultative Council. Others would be recognized as observers. Observers would have the right to participate in all meetings of the Consultative Council. The internal organization and financing, we would organize that council according to thematic chapters, quite in line what we currently see in the POC, so transport, customs, standards, inclusion, and what have you. And the financing and member fees should be decided in the first constituent meeting. So this is still on our agenda to be more refined. And that has been the process for the transformation proposal. The transformation proposal as such was the consequence of 3 possible routes in the past, one of which was the status quo, where our members said this is not feasible at all. The current setup of the consultative committee is not feasible. We should move on and be more inclusive in the UPU works. However, the furthest proposal was to open up totally and propose that the UPU should be opened in a very wide way. However, that was quite obvious very soon on that there is no consensus on that, in particular coming from our representatives coming from member states of the UPU and also from the designated operators being members of the consultative committee today. So what you see right now in this transformation proposal coming from the consultative committee is actually a compromise proposal. And we believe that this proposal is a very good contribution to the deliberations for the task force. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I'm of course open to any questions. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Muchísimas gracias, Walter, por...
Thanks a lot, Walter, for your thorough explanation and your view on the widened CEC and how we should proceed. Thank you for the explanation on the proposals. Now, let's have 10 minutes, a 10-minute break, and then we'll resume. Well, depending on where you are, in Mexico, it's 9:25. We go back at 9, we'll resume at 9:35 in 10 minutes to go on with the next speakers and panelists. Thank you. We'll be back in 10 minutes.
generar ingresos. Y este es uno de los ámbitos donde estoy completamente de acuerdo con usted y queremos aprovechar esta comunicación para aclararlo, para que los gobiernos, los ministerios puedan facilitar fondos. Saben que hay un retorno. Voy a esperar detalles, pues si todas sus ideas, las voy a debatir en interno y a entrar en contacto con usted más adelante. Gracias por esta retroalimentación y por supuesto, aunque no le hable con consecuencias y relevantes, se retorno con toda inspiración, pero creo que si todo va bien vamos a poder muchísimo en el Congreso. Señor Habana, Marcelo, con esto en la palabra.
No, muchas gracias a ti, Dati, a David, a Néstor, a Marcelo. No me diga, señor Cabana, que me hace sentir más viejo de lo que soy. Roberto, por favor, como siempre, con la amistad y el cariño que siempre nos tenemos. Estoy a tus órdenes. Mira, con Marcelo mantenemos una comunicación súper fluida, pero igual tú y yo conversamos cuantas veces sea necesario. Hay mucho por hacer en este tema de la tecnología y tenemos a las personas para hacerlo. Lo que necesitamos es coordinar ciertos esfuerzos y salir adelante, ponernos metas, ponernos fechas de cumplimiento y salir adelante. Este es el momento, ya no hay un mañana. Lo hacemos ahora o perdemos el tren de la oportunidad. Y hay que saber cambiar las malas noticias, como el tema de la pandemia, en oportunidades de salir adelante. Estamos haciendo economías por todas partes, porque evidentemente pues la carga de pago de agua, luz, teléfono, entre otros, se ha amortizado muchísimo en todas las regiones. Bueno, sepamos aprovechar ese tipo de economía de los organismos de las uniones restringidas para este tipo de trabajo. Y por el otro lado, no descartar en su momento buscar donaciones de países miembros, no necesariamente uno, sino varios, que puedan aportar de dinero, con algo de dinero, para amortizar algo el costo. Para último ejemplo, el último ejemplo. Hace poco tiempo nos embarcamos con mi equipo de trabajo a conseguir donaciones para el arreglo de la galería filatélica postal que no existía aquí en UPAE y la hicimos nosotros. Evidentemente llegamos a una cantidad que ni yo hubiera pensado que iba a recolectar dinero, pero pedimos un poquito de dinero a cada uno por los excedentes de dinero que tenían y todos se mostraron generosos en esta aportación. Los servicios tecnológicos son caros, son onerosos y los países miembros en desarrollo se contraen cuando ven una cantidad de dinero así. Pero si de alguna manera amortizamos ese gasto, amortizamos ese costo, con toda seguridad van a tener toda la amplitud para adquirirlos. ¿Por qué? Porque tienes al Centro de Tecnología Postal que habla español aquí, que trabajan 24 horas, 7 días a la semana, y es un trabajo de amigos. Así que hay mucho por hacer, Lati. Por el lado mío, pues yo te agradezco. Espero verte en más de una ocasión durante este año, porque hasta diciembre pues estaré aquí. Y eso pues me permite tener la oportunidad de saludarlos, no solamente en el Congreso, sino pues por este sistema de videoconferencia. En todo caso, pues por mí, muchísimas gracias a todos ustedes y no sé si alguien más quiere agregar algo.
Sí, gracias Roberto. Yo, si Nati me permite, también quisiera agregar algo muy breve. Bueno, nuevamente agradecerte Roberto y Marcelo. Yo creo que hay algunos puntos que son claves de esta reunión. Me parece que podríamos pensar primero en una hoja de ruta o un pequeño plan de acción de aquí al Congreso y luego también ir trabajando paralelamente ya un plan de trabajo de lo que sería ya propiamente estos temas, porque sí sería importante, como tú bien dices Roberto, dejar algo aprobado durante tu periodo, ya sea que esté dentro o no del Congreso, pero sí tener por lo menos una hoja de ruta de cómo vamos a trabajar de aquí al Congreso y paralelamente también trabajar un plan de acción propiamente ya de las actividades conjuntas. El tema de los gobiernos lo hemos conversado mucho, no solo por el tema de tecnología, sino en los otros campos en los que hemos trabajado conjuntamente. En definitiva, podríamos también tener una perspectiva, digamos, de ir separando todo lo que son las actividades que tienen que ver con el desarrollo tecnológico, tener el tema propiamente del desarrollo, el tema de la implementación, el tema de la misión, el tema de las actualizaciones, ir viendo para cada uno de estos segmentos dónde podemos conseguir financiamiento adicional. Puede ser que consigamos para todos, puede ser que consigamos tenemos ya elementos como tú dices, los que hemos trabajado en el tema del IT Mac y el CDS, eso ya nos da unas lecciones aprendidas también de qué hacer y qué no hacer y aprovechar por supuesto el tema de la pandemia, querer decir que esto es bueno, pero por supuesto que tenemos que aprovechar de lo malo de lo mejor y la pandemia ha hecho definitivamente el tema de la digitalización sea de suma importancia, es decir, ahora más que nunca los operadores designados, no solo los operadores designados necesitan entrar con toda la digitalización y yo creo que a través de este trabajo con vos, Roberto, y con tu equipo, representado ahí por Marcelo, yo creo que ya tenemos una experiencia de trabajo muy buena, así que yo esperaría que de parte de podamos tener trazada una hoja de ruta antes del Congreso de los Maestros. Muchas gracias, Roberto y Marcelo.
Lati, perdón, algo que se me estaba ocurriendo de último momento, y eso le decía a Marcelo entre telones. Mira, por darle una idea, nosotros UPAE tenemos el fondo de alícuotas que sirve normalmente para proyectos y para pago de viajes. Este año, por toda seguridad, muchos países miembros van a utilizar $8,000 más o menos para el Congreso en Costa de Marfil. Pero tienes $8,000 más. Ahí tienes $8,000 que se pueden utilizar, pero si lo hacemos con tiempo, se puede hacer un trabajo conjunto con Marcelo y todo el equipo y decir, ok, busquémosle la vuelta para utilizar esos $8,000 que no se van a utilizar para viajes, para utilizar para implementación de N cantidad de proyectos. Que la postre es una inversión en pago de proyectos, que va a ser evidentemente no un gasto sino una inversión. Pero ahí tienes tú $8,000 aproximadamente con 28 países miembros, un poco más, un poco menos, pero ahí tenemos ya algo de fondo. Ahora sí ya lo digo.
Lo que no hay que decir es que se retira. Puede ser que salga el UPAE, pero no creo que te retires y esa energía que tenemos todavía puede trasladar en otras actividades y ojalá que sea dentro del sector.
Sobre esta última idea, sí. Sé que se nos agota el tiempo, entonces ahora solamente quería darles las gracias a todos ustedes una vez más por su presencia y sobre todo por volver a trabajar con todos ustedes y les devuelvo la palabra.
Entonces nuevamente que nos hayan brindado este espacio en su apretada agenda. También agradecerle a mis colegas Lati, David y Miguel y por supuesto a los intérpretes que nos han ayudado para hacer que esta reunión sea exitosa y creo que tenemos ya puntos importantes para de base para empezar a trabajar conjuntamente lo más rápido posible. Así que muchas gracias a todos de parte de la RCD y del PTC y agradecerles nuevamente por este espacio. Muchas gracias y que estén bien.
Bueno, creo que ya son los 10 minutos. Me acabo de dar cuenta que mi reloj trae un adelanto de...
So the 10 minutes are up, and I just realized that my watch is 6 minutes running fast. So let me just check whether Rafael is back. Rafael Crespo. Yes, I am here. Great, Rafael. The thing is that the list is so big in this Zoom, and I cannot see everyone. Now, let us resume this exchange. I will now give the floor to Rafael Crespo Arce. He is Deputy Director General of the Postal Regime of the Ministry of Transport, Mobility and Urban Agenda of Spain. He's official of the Higher Corps of Civil State Administrators of Spain. He is a doctor of logic of the Department of Logic and Methodology of Science at the University of Madrid. He received an extraordinary end of degree award. He worked at the Columbia University School of Public and International Affairs of the Institute on Western Europe with a Fulbright scholarship. Since 2007, he has been the Deputy Director General of the Postal Regime of the Ministry of Transport, Mobility and Urban Agenda of Spain. Prior to that, he held various positions in the Spanish administration, among others, that of Deputy Director General of the Directorate of International Relations and that of Counselor of the Council of Public Works, both in the Ministry of Transport, Mobility and Urban Agenda of Spain. He's also been a professor of logic and history of philosophy and science. His professional activities include various consultancy jobs in the field of the European Union, in Bulgaria and Croatia, as well as the Universal Postal Union and in Latin America, in Bolivia. He's a professor in various selective and training courses of the Ministry of Transport, Mobility and Urban Agenda of Spain on issues of the European Union, and the author of books on the legal regime of the Spanish postal sector. So, Rafael Crespo Arce, you have the floor, and you can tell us about your standpoint in this meeting we have today. Thank you very much, Gerardo. And as usual, it is a pleasure to be with you and to have you not only as a moderator of this meeting, but also as chairman of the first meeting. I'd like to send my greetings to Paula Siciano, who could not come, and I hope she will recover rapidly. So I'd like to greet all the participants. It is more difficult to have a notion of who all the participants are, but I'd like to greet all the PUAS matters, the General Secretariat, the team, and my special thanks to our Secretary General Roberto Cabana, who had the wonderful idea of organizing this panel.
Le agradecemos,
I'm sure.
En cualquier caso, el tema que se me ha propuesto es el de
The topic I will be discussing has to do with the challenges of opening the UPU for governments and states in general, and in particularly as guarantors of consumer rights. And more than consumers, this has to do with the users. And this is quite a limited topic. We have received the outlines on what to address in this panel. Jack Haman has explained the report clearly. Jorge Aldana focused on the problems we face, and Walter has also spoken about the outlook of the private postal sector. vis-a-vis this opening. Now, in order to discuss the obligations of the member states regarding the opening, I think that we have to consider the postal model we have. Some models can be used for some regions, and I will speak about the model we have in the European Union. And like most of the members from the European Union have been using this since January 2011. The title of the law that was enacted in Spain that has to do with the application of the European model for your universal postal service deals with the users' rights and the postal market. So when trying to identify who should be the agents that participate in the future Universal Postal Union that could serve as a roadmap are these. So the first one is the Universal Postal Service. The Universal Postal Service is a commitment that the member states take over in the states regarding the postal services to be delivered to the consumers and users. So the state commits itself to provide these services with a given quality in these countries. Now, because this is an international meeting, we speak about the commitments of a multilateral agency. So in this case, the member states commit to provide universal postal service. It is quite true that universal postal service in some cases is a wish, but in other cases it responds to the needs of the market. In the majority of the countries, the universal postal service is a guarantee in the sense that the services provided maintain a given standard. So we have to commit ourselves with a network such as that of the UPU. We commit ourselves to guarantee to all countries a given standard of service. So that is a commitment that the governments have. And we, insofar as this is an intergovernmental agency, we play a role in this sense in the past and the future of the UPU. Now, in countries at an advanced stage, the postal operator is in charge of the postal operations. And the postal operations in general use operators or postal enterprises that are the organizations in charge of providing these services. These designated operators generally are public operators, and sometimes they're not public operators. In other cases, in the case of Germany, they don't even have a designated operators. Now, this does not rule out the fact that the government has to monitor this. Now, in general terms, we need to have a trusted operator, a strong operator, and in our case, is a public operator that provides this service. The obligations that the governments take on vis-a-vis the users and also multilaterally through international agencies, these can only be provided if there is a strong instrument. This strong instrument are the designated operators, together with the administrations. so the ministries or the regulators. The designated operators are an important chapter. They are an essential player in a universal postal union, an extended universal postal union. And they have to have a clear status that is clearly described, which is different from the previous operators. So now let us speak about the users' rights. The postal market has evolved very rapidly over the past 5 years, and it is increasing the pace at which has evolved as a result of the pandemic. Now, traditional services, for example, letter post is decreasing and e-commerce is increasing more and more. According to a report of the Chamber of Commerce United States, states that between 2017 and 2021, the items related to e-commerce have increased at an amazing rate. So this also has to do with the types of users of these services, but also of the demands of the users of these services posed on the postal operators. Now, what is the impact on the future opening of the UPU to wider postal sector players? First of all, we have new players which we cannot ignore. We cannot ignore these new players. This is because they are already here. They're not knocking at our door. They are really inside the room. They have come in through the window. So we really have to see how we interact with them. These new players are new users. For example, platforms that consolidate items or major issuers of services or other postal operators that cover some segments that are radically new or different from those that we were used to seeing. So these players that have different names have to be included in the international agency. Now we'll see under which conditions this should be made, and we should not be deceived. We should not only consider this for the next generation. These are players that have opinions that are relevant in the current market, and their opinion is something to be considered. The users have also transformed the needs of the Universal Postal Union. So we not only have different products, we are speaking about documents and goods, not only about that, but the way these are treated is different already. Because as users, we're now used to receiving certain quality, which 2 years ago was not even considered. So if you wish to receive something within 12 hours, that's fine. But if it takes more than 12 hours, this is something I'm not so much interested in. So our operators have committed themselves to delivering certain high levels of quality. The UPU in its wider context should respond to these new needs of the market. This market is totally different from the market we knew so far. And this is because until not so long ago, at least in letterpost, but not only in letterpost, in general terms, the world network of the UPU was a monopoly. It was just one single network. There was some multinational agencies that replicated the network of the UPU. But this was a niche market and it did not compete with the UPU network. But this is no longer the case. We have to consider that we have a network where the weakest link is the one that has to consider and improve very rapidly. And if we have an adequate global chain, we see that there are rival chains that already exist and can eventually wipe us out from the map of postal services. So if we do not open up the UPU in a controlled way to other players, we will see that these other players in 3 years' time will no longer have an interest in considering us at all. So I think the time has come to consider these things. And we have to look at which are the weak points, and users, we really are committed with free competition. So why do we speak about an opening of the UPU to a wider postal sector? There are several agents, there are new users, there are new users' rights of the traditional users that pose demands on us. And so, in other words, it's not only because this is being requested from us, but we internally wish to bring about this change.
Muchas gracias, Rafa, por todo lo que nos has
Thank you, Rafa, for your comments and your standpoint on the wider postal sector and how the platforms and the new players, as a result of the pandemic, have really affected all the traditional exchange. Thank you very much for your presentation. I will now give the floor to Stuart Smith. He is Chief of the International Postal Affairs Unit at the U.S. Department of State. Stuart Smith is Chief of the International Postal Affairs Unit of the Office of Specialized and Technical Agencies in the Bureau of International Organization Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. He supports the Secretary of State in discharging his responsibilities for the formulation, coordination, and oversight of foreign policy related to international postal services, as well as other international delivery services, including U.S. positions in the Universal Postal Union and the Postal Union of the Americas, Spain, and Portugal.
He's the head of the delegations that attend the CA and the POC of UPU, and in coordination with other agencies, including the USPS and the Postal Regulatory Committee. He also is the executive director of the Advisory Committee of Postal Services and the International Delivery of the Department of State, the agency through which the users and private providers provide services, and that provide information to the department. Smith arrived at his position in March 2020 after a long career abroad and focusing on economic issues. In Washington, he acted as the director of IOSTA from 2016 to 2018, and he provided services and directed a number of delegations in the United States before a broad range of international agencies. He joined the team of the Postal Affairs in 2019 and was part of the delegation of the United States and of the Extraordinary Congress of UPU in that year in Geneva. He was born in Ohio. He has a BA of the Williams College in History and Economy and a master's degree of Indiana University. He is an excellent cook, and he also is married to Elizabeth Chambers, and has a son in high school. And he loves bicycle and trekking and cooking. The store to have the floor. Welcome.
Thank you, Gerardo, and apologies for providing such a long biography. That probably was a little bit more detailed than people needed, but in any case, it's a pleasure to see all of you today, even virtually. And I'd like to start by first, can everyone hear me? I hope so. Okay. I want to start first by thanking the task force under Jack's energetic and able leadership, and also the union, which so capably represents all of us here in the hemisphere and in Spain and Portugal, and has brought us together for this very valuable discussion about what I think is really the key issue that is in front of the union today. And I should note in thanking the union that we also owe a great deal debt of gratitude to Roberto Cavana and his team for their help over the last couple of years in reforming the terminal dues system. And we're confident that PUAS can play a similar role in this important reform endeavor about widening the UPU to stakeholders, private stakeholders in the wider sector. Now, as we've heard, we've just closed an unusual and difficult year since we last met in Bern in the council sessions in February of 2020. Over the last 12 months, we've seen members of the Postal family struck down with COVID-19. We've seen our national economies enter into crisis, and we've seen international travel fall to unimaginably low levels with follow-on consequences for our ability to transport international mail. All of this has diminished our ability as postal operators and regulators to serve the public, and in our view, it has strengthened the case for making important changes in how we do business. Now, I think all of you are familiar with the position of the United States on the issue of making the UPU more inclusive, so I'm not going to repeat it at great length. But what I would like to do, however, is to focus on why we believe opening is not just necessary to respond to a fast-changing marketplace, but to address the very issues of consumer benefit that are the focus of this panel. Now, all of you have heard us articulate the principles that guide our international postal policy, and that policy is something the State Department has been responsible for since the Beijing Congress back in 1999. Those policies are encouraging an efficient and competitive global system that provides fair and non-discriminatory postal rates while preserving the single postal territory and member commitment to universal postal service. Leveling that playing field in the provision of international postal and other delivery services, and not least distinguishing between governmental and operational responsibilities in intergovernmental organizations like the UPU that oversee such services. The key point for us is that these principles aim not at benefiting a particular operator or type of operator, but are ensuring that the international network, like our own domestic ones, provides optimal consumer benefit. Why do we believe that bringing the wider postal sector into the UPU will advance that goal? The answer is simple. We believe that it will create synergies that will benefit all actors in the sector and consumers as well, bringing more access to services, better service quality, and competitive pricing that gives best value to customers. In our view, ensuring the satisfaction of consumers' changing needs is key. We've all seen the statistics and are aware of the increasing volumes of delivery flows that take place outside the UPU, as other speakers have referenced and as Mr. Aldano highlighted in his excellent presentation. This evolution shows that consumers' needs are changing, and we believe that the UPU must change to address them to remain relevant to the whole of the sector. Now, of course, the UPU could just accept its diminishing share of the pie, but in our view, accepting these parallel realities is not optimal, as each side has something valuable to bring to the table. And by joining forces, we would create a whole that would be greater than the sum of its parts. For instance, the UPU obviously brings its common standards and universal service that its operators provide, as well as the cooperation and interaction it facilitates among stakeholders at very different levels of development. Private operators, for their part, would bring added volumes, transport capacity, and their own innovative technological solutions. Now, the other part of the equation that I mentioned in terms of our principles is leveling the playing field between private and public operators doing business in the same market to enhance competition and thereby benefit consumers. This would provide more product choices, more competitive pricing, and we believe ultimately improve quality of service. So that very briefly is a summary of the position we've had and why we've attached such importance to this issue since it first arose over 20 years ago, as was mentioned previously at the Beijing Congress. And it subsequently remained a priority of U.S. policy through administrations of both parties. I guess the other topic we're to address today is the challenges that the opening will bring for regulators and governments. I think Mr. Crespo very ably highlighted those, and Jack as well in his presentation. Key among them, I think, is clarifying the operational and governmental divide, since wider sector participation is clearly, obviously, only appropriate in the former. Although, of course, as governments, we benefit from the input of all stakeholders in elaborating our national positions. And that, incidentally, is the purpose of the advisory committee that the State Department has to group all stakeholders. Now, we've conceded in previous task force meetings and elsewhere in council meetings that we understand that ours is an ambitious vision and that not all countries share the same level of ambition. But we firmly believe that the issue has been put off for too long, and that if we simply postpone it to future Congress cycles, we'll be endangering the UPU's long-term relevance and viability. And it's for that reason that we've really embraced the task force proposal as a solid base on which to build, one that incorporates elements of the vision that we and others have articulated, but that also contains safeguards to address the concerns that have been expressed about universal service and other issues. We've suggested in the past that perhaps those concerns and fears are exaggerated, as widening the UPU would simply represent on the international level what many of us have already done on the national level. But in our view, the best way to confirm that is to examine each dimension of the proposal in detail and elaborate the elements on which we can all agree, something that we think that the chair's ambitious timeline will allow us to do over the next month or month and a half. For our part, we intend to participate fully and constructively in that process and hope it will allow us all to converge around a proposal that is more ambitious than the ones that we have already seen from some of our partners in other regions and from the consultative committee. That is not to say that some of those proposals do not contain very valuable elements. The consultative committee proposal, for instance, would make that body much more relevant, and we regret that the committee has not had those powers since it was first created. But we have to ask whether those changes alone are enough in light of the changing marketplace we confront. For our part, we don't think they are, and that's why we'd like to see if we can all work together over the next month to see if we can agree on something more ambitious. So that in sum is a brief summary of our position. We thank you for your attention and look forward to the discussion and the conversation that we all need to have in depth on this topic. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Stuart, por...
Thank you, Stuart, for your explanation and for sharing your thought about the opening. So thank you for your participation. Now I'm going to give the floor to the next member of the panel, Franklin Furtado, who's a coordinator of Governance and working for the Ministry of Communications of Brazil, and he is coordinator of postal services at the ministry. He graduated at business administration. He has an specialization in the public services. Since he was very young, he has worked in international agencies, and since 2011, he has been responsible for the supervision of the Brazilian postal sector in the Ministry of Communications, setting goals for universalization and quality of services provided by the Brazilian designated operator, Correios do Brasil. He has participated in different working groups of UPU, and he was the head of the working group also for coordinating the economic restructuring, and he was president of the UPU Reform Project Group from 2013 to 2016, and is delegate of the Brazilian delegation of the UPU and Postal UPSP since 2014. Can you all hear me? Thank you, Gerardo. My greetings to all of you. I want to thank USP for promoting this panel on so many topics that are so important to many member countries of the UPU. Actually, Brazil is part of the task force, and we have already expressed our position in more than once. UPU harmonizes a number of standards in the sector, and we believe that that reality makes us think of the presence of other players that can contribute with new ideas to modernize the current services and even to expand the repertoire of the services related to the postal activities. We need to incorporate these players of the widened as participation, but we believe that it is very important to maintain the roles that currently are guaranteed to the governments and the designated operators in the definition of these standards. The terms of reference in Istanbul discusses the policy of access to the new members to the products and services of UPU. This mandate was then expanded to something that can be confused with a process of reform that is much wider than was intended at the 2016 Congress. Although the change of the structure of UPU is one of the key elements in the proposal, they do not discuss in detail the consequences. The consequences only appear in Table 6 in the addendum that was developed by the International Bureau. The makeup of the councils, the rules for electing the members, and the roles are issues that should be duly clarified so that the member countries may decide whether this widening, this opening of UPU may really benefit the organization and its members. However, none of this has been detailed so that the member countries may discuss them. Together with the structural changes, the proposal would also have a significant impact on the funding systems.
The current status of the document states that the amount will continue to be paid by the countries or the governments, so the annual fees to be paid by each sector and member states will be additional resources with respect to the current budget. However, it is not clear what activities are included in the new members. This payment will be used to finance activities resulting from providing international postal services defined in the laws. In this case, in order to prevent double invoicing, the governments should not expect a reduction in their fees because the designated operators would begin to finance activities that are financed by contributions of the member countries. And this is one of the doubts we have. Finally, it is important to highlight that the change in the condition of the designated operators vis-à-vis the UPU resulting from the incorporation of new members should not imply that the rights and obligations of the designated operators responsible for universal postal service will be reduced or remain at a lower level compared to that of the new members. For that reason, we think that the changes in the structure and operation of the UPU resulting from the expansion of the membership should be clearly detailed and informed to all the UPU members from the financial, administrative, and operational standpoints. And this before the Congress can make a decision on the incorporation of new members. We understand that this is a task that has to be commissioned by the Abidjan Congress to the Council of Administration and to the POC through a clear mandate to ensure full transparency and wide representation in the discussions. The relevance of this topic should call for caution when imposing changes to the union. Decisions that affect the way the UPU is organized cannot be made hastily. We have to advance at a fast pace because the market has changed at that pace. Nevertheless, it is important to make decisions cautiously in order to consider all the potential impacts and consequences that this might imply. So we need to seek consensus. It would not be good for the stability of the union to adopt radical changes. In the last two extraordinary congresses of the union, we have seen how important it is to make decisions based on specific studies that take into account the impact of the new norms on the future of the postal sector and the organization. I also prepared a series of questions, but I think that at a more appropriate moment, we can then have an exchange with the different participants. Otherwise, this would take too long. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Franklin, for expressing your concerns, and I agree that questions you have and you can send us the questions so we can all reflect on these. Now, I will now give the floor to Mr. Rajiv Venugopal. He is General Manager of International Relations at Canada Post. He has the PhD in Political Sciences from Carleton University and a master's degree in International Politics from the University of London and a BA in Political Science from the University of New Brunswick. In addition to studies on regulatory affairs at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, he currently holds the position of General Manager in the International Relations at Canada Post, where he has developed extensive experience in the postal sector, participating in high-level international events, such as the 26th Conference on Postal and Distributional Economics held in 2018 in Croatia, and others. He's also served the government of New Brunswick, Canada, Executive Council, Intergovernmental Affairs, Economic Development, served as the Senate of the Parliament of Canada, and as a professor of political science. Thank you very much. I would like to speak in Spanish, which is the language of music, but I do need interpretation from my Spanish into your Spanish. So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary General, dear colleagues and guests, thank you for giving me the floor and the invitation sent to Canada to share our opinion regarding the opening of the UPU to the wider postal sector. It is an honor to be part of this panel and with my dear friend Franklin from Brazil and the other panelists. I'd like to thank Mr. Cavanagh for his outstanding leadership on this topic, as well as the hard work done by the Secretariat to help with the different POAS member countries. I'd also like to greet all the other members of the panel, particularly the colleagues from the other restricted unions. Now, first of all, I would like to say that I really miss not being with you in a face-to-face meeting. This is something that is shared by all my colleagues in Canada. The Zoom meetings and Microsoft Teams and Adobe Connect meetings were necessary during the pandemic, but that is not the usual way in which our union works. When we wish to discuss topics, we do that in face-to-face meetings and in an open way, and also in a very frank way. We don't like to hide behind screens or behind emails. We meet, we discuss, and find ways to achieve solidarity and consensus when this is necessary. You might recall that we unanimously voted a resolution in Costa Rica before the Extraordinary Congress of 2019 supporting the United States. And we have worked together as a region on many topics under the leadership of Mr. Cavana. Likewise, I would like to convey my best greetings on behalf of Canada and on behalf of my colleagues while we face this global pandemic. This is a terrible situation, and our thoughts are with you. Now let us go over to the topic we have at hand. Canada supports the UPU reform. We believe that this work should be led by the member countries and not by the International Bureau, private companies, or any other interest group representing them. We support the position that defends the role of the designated postal operators, and we believe that the obligation of universal postal service should not be affected by these changes. This includes specific topics such as remuneration. We do not support any plan that considers deciding any subjects now or others later on. We believe that nothing has been decided until everything has been decided. In other words, Canada is against any plan that promises the UPI to follow a specific path before the details have been clarified, and that all the reforms to the acts should be clearly defined, debated, and understood by every single member before any decision is made. This includes premature changes to the Constitution, to the Convention, or to the regulations. We positively welcome the initiatives, the constructive initiatives, and the current dialogue on the UPU reforms. However, we consider that the April session of the Council of Administration and the 27th UPU Congress cannot be a deadline to complete this task. Quite the contrary, we have to focus on maintaining productive meetings, ensuring that the voices of all the member countries are heard on this topic. There are no differences on the basis of the size of a country, whether it's big or small. At the UPU and at POAS, all countries are equal and all opinions deserve being heard. We positively also welcome the opinions made by the restricted unions such as POAS and that of our brothers and sisters of the Caribbean Postal Union, MAPO, Post Europe, ABC, and so on. They, more than any other entity, are those who are in the best position to understand the positions of each region on this topic. To advance, we need to have meetings on a more frequent basis, more focused on this specific topic, so that all the member countries can fully understand what is at stake.
We support meetings organized by the International Bureau for the month of March, and we hope that additional meetings will be held in 2021 and in 2022 so that an adequate reform strategy is finally agreed on. Canada and many other countries in the PUAS and in other regions believe that this reform is very important and it should not be done hastily. The decisions we will make will define the path forward for the UPU in the coming years. That is why we need to take time to bring about these changes in one single attempt and to do these properly. Dear friends, I'm most interested in listening to your opinions on this topic, but I would like to know what we can do to listen to the voices of our regional colleagues. You will recall that Mercado Libre was with us at the high-level consultation meetings at the executive meeting in Montevideo in 2019. I would like to know what their opinion is on this topic. What would be the opinion of our airlines, of the allies in the region, such as LATAM and other private organizations? Would they be interested in becoming UPU members? Is there a value in our opening up to them? What are the benefits that they would have vis-a-vis the current members if they join us? And even more, that they are ready to pay for having a place at the table. That is very important. But we must assume that they would like to join us automatically or that they are willing to join the union. That is why it is recommended to discuss these topics that are difficult topics with them too, with the private sector. So I would like to close my participation with an urgent request to all of you, to the member countries. I would like to invite all the member countries to express your opinions and concerns in writing to the special UPU team on this topic. This topic will affect each one of us. The PUAS members were essential to achieve an extension in the established deadline by the International Bureau to submit comments. That is why let us ensure that all our opinions are heard.
Considering that the next meeting of the ad hoc group will be on March the 3rd. So we hope that all of you may have a chance to send your comments in writing before that date. As usual, our friends of the General Secretariat at PSP are ready and available to help out those who need it so that the comments may be sent in a timely manner. This is very important. It's a good idea to open UPU if we seek to reform it and to modernize it. Dear colleagues, we should not be afraid to change. We should not fear change. The global pandemic has been an evidence that cooperation and collaboration are beneficial to all. Now, if we're going to change, we as member countries must lead this effort, and we must ensure that the views of all the countries are listened to. And this is a very important thing. Our key motivation should not be just to have different seats to solve the difficult financial position of UPU. Rather the contrary, we should see this moment as a unique opportunity to fully modernize the global system for the benefit of all mankind. Mr. Chair, thank you. Thank you, Raj, for your intervention. Those were very precise and concise comments on the position of Canada on such a complicated issue that has many edges. And as you very well pointed out, each country needs to be heard. And the working group should, the task force for the opening up of UPU should hear all. So with this, we've listened to all the panelists. So now we would open the panel so that all of us here in this virtual room may have a say. The first in the list of participants is Arten Oswald as the first person who requested the floor, then Franklin Castro of El Salvador, and then Franklin Furtado from Brazil. So, if that's okay with you, Martin Oswald.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me? Gracias. Okay. Thank you very much for giving me the floor, Gerardo, and greetings to all our friends in PUAS region. Actually, I was wondering how to start. Basically, last year, we discovered that we cannot hold a Congress because actually the regulation behind doesn't allow us. And due to COVID, unfortunately, we were not able to hold the Congress and to decide about the important topics. So for me, basically, the opening up is currently due to COVID and other circumstances, not of the vital importance. Anyway, coming from Europe, I have to say that postal operators from Europe, where letter mail is still a significant part of our revenues, and where actually we are cooperating with private businesses for many years, even 20 and even more, we have no difficulties when it comes to cooperation with outside stakeholders. Where I see my worries actually are in the face how in the future we will lose the intragovernmental spirit of our organization. And I believe that these topics need also to be addressed. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Marjan, por los
Thank you, Marjan, for your comments. Now I'll recognize Franklin Castro of El Salvador. Thank you. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. It's a pleasure to be with you. And I'm pleased to see that there are so many countries present, and there are so many representatives of the countries in all the areas. I listened carefully to all your presentations that were very enriching and provide a broader view of what people are thinking globally. In El Salvador, we agree with the position put forward by Canada in the sense of knowing first what it is that we want. Whether we open UPU for the private. So in one of the comments, they said that the private are already participating, and we know that some governments have opened the door to the private sector for logistics, but this has not been legalized by UPU, and that is why we are. The steps have been taken to legalize it. Certainly, I think that we need to listen to everybody, including the private sector, to see what they want, because there are no clear position. We don't have an exact position of how far this should go. And then, I agree with Canada that we need to open this until we really know what it is that we need and what are the benefits that we as public operators will have, because we haven't heard anything about it. Indeed, the private sector has a lot of privileges, not under regime, so under government, so they may provide better services. But remember that as public institutions, we have alliances. Salvador is a clear example. We have alliances, we have partnerships with private operators who indeed provide express services, and very good, by the way. But now that doesn't mean that they should be allowed to participate within UPU. One of the previous representatives explained the method where probably the private may be looking to have that co-responsibility in the postal sector, in the customs part, because we know that the postal service has a preferential treatment at the customs, and probably that's what they intend to get. I consider that before presenting any positions to the opening, first we must set the objectives and the interest of all the operators, the postal operators, stating what we wish. If there is to be an opening, if that opening is being promoted by some countries, that's a good thing. But UPU includes many countries and we need a consensus. If we don't, we are going to have an equal treatment of some operators, because clearly enough, not all the postal operators in the world, depending on the power of the countries, are strong vis-a-vis the private sector. There are some countries that may lose a lot if general conditions are accepted, if there is a wide opening. So we need to check whether we agree that this occurs. And if we do, we need to have clear proposals, but not, as has been said from the UPU director, the general director. We need to discuss it in Cote d'Ivoire. I believe that we need to wait until we have a better, we need more flexibility, and we need to go through the topics more in depth. And indeed, when we have a clear idea of what we want and what we are going to get as a benefit, because here the benefits so far, I consider that we haven't seen the benefits very clearly. We need to see what the private sector seeks as a benefit, because, of course, if they were not to benefit, they wouldn't be pressing for this widening of the postal sector. And indeed, if we do, the position should be that in the decision-making processes, we need to be very careful, because decision-making we can't let the private sector to prevail in the decision-making of the governments. So it's good to open UPU. I'm not saying the contrary, but we need to be very careful. We need to be very clear in the region as to what we need and what we're going to get as an exchange, what are going to be our benefits, and if those benefits are going to be reinvested in the countries that have a competitive disadvantage. So I don't see that that's taking place. So I'd like to know really what are the benefits that we will get, to see what the compromise is. So we need to be fair in all of the decision making and in the benefits that we're going to get with the countries. Thank you. Thank you, Franklin, indeed, for your intervention. We thank El Salvador Now, Franklin Furtado from Brazil, and then Cuba, and Vincenzo from Italy, and then Marcela. So first, let me recognize Franklin Furtado from Brazil. Thank you. Yes, I requested the floor because some participants wrote in the chat personally requesting the questions that I asked, but I haven't presented here. So let me read some of the questions and then I can share them in the chat, right? So I divided the questions into certain blocks. The first is the nature and the role of UPU. The change of membership proposed, does it have an impact on the intergovernmental nature of UPU, considering that the widened postal sectors includes entities that are not directly related with the regulation and operation of the postal services, and even less with the provision of universal postal services? The role of UPU changes with that opening. On the opening process, what is the rationale behind the opening of UPU faster and more fully to the widened postal sector? Should the opening be really fast? What are the benefits of that, and what are the risks involved? The UPU opening process, does it have the objective to get new resources for maintaining the organization? Can the opening contribute and strengthen the postal network, and how? What would be the level needed for institutional changes in UPU to better respond to the needs of the current members and new participants? Today, UPU has a consultative council with a range of participants of the different countries. How do the member countries assess the contributions of the CEC and for the regulatory framework? Wouldn't it be more appropriate to study the restructuring of the consultative council before reforming the entire organization? On the interest in opening, something that Raj already mentioned, what are the opportunities that the real developments that this measure should bring to the stakeholders in the postal ecosystem and UPU? What are the interests of the rest of the players in participating in UPU, especially in the big platforms and non-designated operators? What is the real value proposal of UPU for the private sector and civil society? And we should also include what the newcomers would contribute with, in addition to the financial contributions. Shouldn't we consider to require reciprocity, that products and services of UPU are of real interest for the new members? Does the private sector depend on these contributions for the better performance of UPU? So is one of the contributions would be for the simplified customs procedures, both for tax issues.
Should the potential competitive advantages be discussed? On what reciprocity basis should this be considered vis-a-vis the regulatory basis does this private sector depend on? And to finalize, the future impact. How will the decisions be made in an environment of multiple forces where all are considered members and all have a vote? Because today technical cooperation is a cornerstone for developing postal services, which would be the basis of new association models for implementing specific projects among the new participating forces of UPU. The one who pays will take the project. It is important to consider how this will affect the legal situation in each country. In many countries, they only consider one designated operator at a given moment,
that might be a designated operator and other operators in the postal sector. How does this affect the internal relations in the countries? So as you can see, we have many questions. And I think that other countries also have a lot of questions, which I didn't include here. And in my opinion, this is a process that poses so many questions as this. To me, this is a process that is not mature enough for making decisions, final decisions on. So, as I said earlier, I will write out all the questions and include them in the chat so that you have them there. Thank you, Gerardo.
Muchas gracias, Franklin, y muchas gracias por toda esta.
Franklin, and thank you for all this set of questions that lead us to rereading the report of the working group, trying to answer them in the context of our countries, as operators, as ministry, or other situations, to try and respond to all these questions that you will be sharing with us and that we'll be including in the document that we will produce as the minutes of this meeting. Thank you for questions, Franklin. Moving on with the speakers, with the questions, I will give the floor to Cuba. Carlos, are you there? Are you going to take the floor? Thank you, Gerardo. It's Raúl. Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? Yes, we can hear you perfectly well, Raúl. Well, first of all, my greetings to all the participants and our special thanks to PUAS for organizing this meeting, which is so important to clarify many issues with a view to the decisions that will have to be made in due time. Franklin Furtado asked a series of very interesting and important questions. So we consider these are crucial in order to adopt a position and to make the decisions that will have to be made at the Congress. We have two questions, or rather one question and an issue that we'd like to expand on. One thing is that we were quite surprised when we read the document prepared by the special group that no mention is made of a very important actor, namely customs. Maybe the special team hasn't considered this, but in none of the member categories have customs been included, and we are aware that customs are a very relevant stakeholder, strongly involved in the work of the post, in the work of the operators, not only the designated operators in general, but of all the operators. We are not sure whether the idea is to maintain the current relations we have, as is the case between UPU and the WCO, but we were a bit surprised that no reference is made to the WCO as a stakeholder. I'd like to know what the vision we have in terms of the proposal made vis-à-vis customs. And secondly, to add on to the points mentioned by other colleagues, we think that it is important, in order to make a decision, that a roadmap should be defined that really includes each and every action required to implement following the decision adopted on the scope of the opening of the UPU to other stakeholders and players. Without having a detailed roadmap, it is very difficult to adopt a position or make decisions or join a consensus, which ultimately is what we should try to achieve at the Congress. So these are the 2 points that we have, in addition to supporting all the questions made by Franklin and by Reggie in their previous presentations. And I'd like to thank POAS once again for this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Cuba. Muchas gracias, Raúl.
Thank you, Cuba. Thank you, Raúl, for your comments.
Voy a dar la palabra a Vincenzo
I will now
Aurelio.
give the floor to Vincenzo Aurelio. You have the floor, Vincenzo.
I hope you can hear me well. First of
Espero que
all,
me oigan bien. En primer lugar,
I would like to thank
quisiera
POAS,
agradecerle
in
a la
particular
UPAE
Gerardo
y en particular a Gerardo
and my fellow countryman
y a
Roberto.
mi amigo Roberto Habana por organizar esta reunión. Es un honor para mí estar aquí con usted.
On what was discussed so far. Italy believes in a more inclusive EPO. However, today, no matter the work started many years ago to evaluate the possible extension of the Union to the private sector, we need answers which are still lacking, and listen to voices of each member country. As Jack Amanda reported just before, even the appropriate task force has not generated a work approved by the majority of its members. This is because there are still many questions without answers. And this is why many members are calling for a gradual approach. A wide opening could lead to another turn of the Union itself. And this is for sure what we all want to avoid. There are doubts even on this would be improvement for the Union on its financial situation. An expected risk that would worsen the current situation can also be affirmed, as proven by other UN agencies that have already expanded their membership. The results were not as expected, with the administrative management losing effectiveness and incurring in insolvencies. Today, for instance, ITU being made up by more than 900 members, mainly from the private sector, is the UN greatest loss-making agency. The EPU's stability and good functioning is tightly associated with DO's role by being its main defining asset. Services provided by DOs are of primary importance, thereof ensuring an efficient postal delivery network is just one of the relevant goals. DOs in their institutional role provide services in public utilities sector and assure the inclusion of local communities. See, for instance, the role of DOs in COVID-19. Just to give you an example, Poste Italiane is involved in vaccine distributions at the national level. And in Italy, you can also now fix appointment not only through the dedicated government website, but also individually via postman or postal call centers, and even by inserting your health card in a postal cash dispenser machine. In consideration of what experienced so far, it seems unlikely that operators from the private sector will be keen to providing the same services granted designed operators to the whole community. Innovate, yes, but progress step by step. As far as research is concerned, an impact analysis could be greatly beneficial because it would generate insight that would in turn trigger an informed and well-aware decision-making process, which is what we all should push for. Many thanks for your attention, and I pass the floor back to you, Gerard. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Vincenzo, por tus reflexiones y compartirlas con...
Thank you, Vincenzo, for your reflections and for sharing your reflections with this group of friends at PUAS and the other colleagues. Marcela Maron from Argentina is asking for the floor. You have the floor, Marcela. Thank you, Gerardo. I just like to always express thanks in meetings because I think this sometimes takes up your time. But I'd like to thank Roberto and everyone else for this opportunity to hold such an open discussion without any limitation. I don't want to extend myself too much, but we can start stating what we agree on. From what I have heard so far, we have to comply with the citizens' needs, the needs of the people. We also agree on the fact that the designated operator has to provide universal postal service. We would have to define what type of universal postal service we're speaking of, and this is a pending issue. And we also agree on the fact that all the other designated operators are already in UPU. It has already been mentioned. Now, the point is whether it is not so clear whether they're working according to the rules or not. So if we agree on having them join us, they can join us, but paying for the service they wish to deliver or to provide or to receive. Each member state has the plenipotentiary decision of deciding in what way who can participate at the Universal Postal Union. In other words, that the UPU member is the member state. So it is each state that will define whether other stakeholders can participate. And finally, there's of course much more that I could say, but I don't want to speak much. But we all agree that the platforms, and that also spoke about Mercado Libre, platforms are the main clients we have, considering international postal service and parcel cost is regulated by UPU.
So if they were to enter, they should pay a lot of money, but not to fund the UPU, but to provide support to the international network, and so that the service may be the same and fluent in all the states where it goes through. And the last issue that Cuba just pointed out, and I think it's appropriate, Raul asked said that we should discuss the issue of the customs, because what many private operators want is to use the postal channel that is exclusive of the designated operators. As an example, we are working in a very open discussion in Argentina so that the post, the Argentine post that is at present our DO, may be the channel through which each private operator working in Argentina may use to send products abroad. So the designated operator is chosen by the state, but we allow the private sector to go through that channel to increase the volume that is moving through UPU, that is the residual item. I think that what happened here actually is that there was an indiscriminate access because they didn't want to take it as an internal decision, and we have a volume of parcel that is really impressive, and we're going to have more. The only issue is that we must clearly understand that who's moving it, and so that we may all gain. Finally, I would like to make a brief comment about what we are going through. When I had a chance, when I was invited by Post Europe to give a presentation, I said that really we're going through a time when the pandemic, COVID, took us from our fish bowls and put us in the midst of an ocean, in the midst of a tsunami. And in that ocean, we need to speak of hyper collaboration, hyper connectivity, and hyper everything, so that all the citizens around the world may receive and send parcel or letters or any service that is provided under the Universal Postal Service at home and with full transparency. So thank you for giving me the chance to speak. No, thank you, Marcela, for your interventions and the questions that you put on the table, so that I think that we have to think this over. And as I said, this is food for thought, which leads us to reread the report by the task force. Colombia is requesting the floor, and Angelica Vanegas, and then Costa Rica, Campos. So, Angie, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I want to thank PUASPA for this excellent panel. It's been wonderful. I learned a lot. I have a broader view now. I understand it better. I thank all the panelists. I won't speak more. I want to be very concise in the comments of Colombia in this regard. I think that an opening is necessary indeed. I think that that's being requested by the market and by the clients. Today, there are many partnerships between designated operators and the private sector. So that's no secret. We need to give a better service, and we have there, and the market offers many opportunities, and we have to think of the customers. Now, it's, as Marcelo said, but it's important to do things well, and that implies doing things in an ordered manner, not to be passionate, because that leads to problems, to mistakes, or to hurting many people, or having a negative impact on many people. The idea is to have a win-win. So we need to invite the widened sector, so that we may all have a win-win, thinking of the clients, thinking of strengthening the postal sector. And we need a clear, concise, and precise roadmap that, as very well pointed out in his intervention, Jack, when he talked about the different steps. I really liked Jack's presentation, my compliments. And we need to address the structure and the access to the products and services. We need to take into account what are the rates that they're going to pay. We need to establish what will be the rights and the roads, and what happens with Universal Postal Services in and the acts, the regulations, the norms. They need to be very clear, transparent, and we should have win-win situations. As Raul said, we need to include the customs, the airlines. Everybody is part of the logistic chain that would help strengthen this chain. So I think that we are not, we need to be, to go in a very meditated manner in each step. I think that win-win is a wonderful word, because we need the clients to win, we need the UPU to win, and we need also the potential parts of the union should also win. Now, as Marcela said today, the rest of some stakeholders are already participating. So the idea is to see how we can increase their participation, how they can join the working groups, because now it's important, as Raj said, to have more meetings, and that there are countries that are more developed than others, but all the voices need to be heard, because we'll all receive the impact. So it's important to continue to have meetings and to listen to everybody, read the documents, make the comments, because if not, so the invitation is to continue to be united and strengthened, and holding regular meetings frequently to clarify the doubts and to listen to all the countries for the sake of a responsible opening. Thank you. Thank you, Andrew, for your comments. Thank you, Colombia, for your participation. Now I'll give the floor to Costa Rica. Kenneth Campos. Thank you, Gerardo. I wanted to start with my greetings and thanks to the organizers of this event, because this is a topic that may be a real revolution, and maybe this is maybe a pandemic is not the right moment to do it, but I appreciate all the discussion that we've had, but I think that we have not reached the time for a final decision. My comment goes more toward leaving aside the international law and all the regulations as being Correos de Costa Rica is a state-owned company, and it needs to have, in its strategic planning, it needs to be competitive and to diversify services, generating a number of things that need to be addressed from the commercial point of view. If we analyze all this, the commercial, we need to think of competitiveness. How can competitiveness affect Correo de Costa Rica, of Argentina, or different countries? Although we know that we all have different legal structures, because the countries have addressed it differently, but we have a common characteristic, and it is that the market is open and wild. So how can we address this with the support of the UPU and having this as a single channel, and how we can improve our competitiveness? Does it have an impact on the work that we do? Giving more space to these stakeholders may be positive, because we may have partnerships that may be necessary to give different services, but it may also go against us, because we may give access, very sensitive access to information that might have, and they may take advantage of it. I think that I'm asking more questions than adding new things, but I couldn't miss the opportunity to say it.
Gracias, Kenneth, por tu intervención y por la parte que comentas.
Thank you for your intervention, Kenneth, and thank you for mentioning the legal aspects. Yes, indeed, the decision, there may be an intergovernmental panel, but each country has its own domestic law. And so we should consider the domestic amendments. Honduras is requesting the floor, please. Nivida Mejía.
Adelante, Honduras, por favor.
Honduras, please. Nivida. I'm sorry, my mic was off. Good morning, everyone. My warmest greetings. I thank you for the effort. I know that the POSP team and the designated operators and all the speakers, I'm aware of the great effort and the experts. My intervention is I want to focus on that I want to remind you that you should not forget the countries that are going through a deplorable situation. In our case, Honduras, and I'm saying this with an in-depth knowledge, but because I'm in charge of the international accounts, the bulletins, and I have a general view of the real situation that this operator of Honduras is going through. The greatest concern is the volume of items has decreased remarkably, and a cost has significantly increased. Why? Because they're not using us to deliver the mail here in Honduras. So this is of great concern when we speak of giving access to these private operators. It's okay. I'm okay with the opening, the categories, because I trust that we have experts in charge of that work. But I please beg you to consider the situation of operators such as ours. I know that it's not the responsibility of the rest of the governments or the rest of the operators. It's up to the government of Honduras to help the designated operator out. And now, during the pandemic, I have seen really that we are not receiving post from most UPU member countries. From the region, we are only receiving from 3 countries. Why? Because what we are told by the users is that they're told that if they are to send items through Correos de Honduras, they have no access. However, they are told that they may send mail or post through DHL, and DHL is a monster. You know it. Here in Honduras, DHL is a monster. So I beg you not to forget us. Please take into account the designated operators such as Honduras or Haiti or many others that are in the same situation, because I'm struck. Because they need to be helped. That is why UPU was created, so that we may all benefit, as Andrew said. So that's my remark. Please don't forget us, designated operators, as in the case of Honduras, where we are losing the volume. Let me just say that the United States, we lost $2 million for the cost. I know that it's not the fault of the rest of the designated operators, but we beg you to please support us. We have a long way still.
Buen día, gracias.
So that is all. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You're quite right. We have to take into account all the operators. Raj from Canada had already mentioned this. The larger ones, the medium-sized ones, the smaller ones that are more developed, in order to have a position of all the member countries. There is no one else asking for the floor. Let me tell you that those of us who are following us through streaming can send your comments in writing to PUAS, or also any doubts that you might have regarding the document that will be produced next week on this panel that we have had. I see no one else is asking for the floor. Let's wait a couple of seconds still in case there are any requests for the floor.
So nobody else is asking for the floor. Fernando, I think Jack was asking for the floor. Yes, go ahead, Jack.
Go ahead, Jack.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Of course, I don't want to conclude because that's not the task of the task force chairs to conclude. But allow me to say few things because tomorrow it will be another day, and I will be there on behalf of Belgium and so on. Today, I would like to say thank you very much to UPAEP initiative and for the great organization with an impressive presence. Thank you very much, Roberto and Gerardo, for this discussion. But more important, I think that I was very happy to listen carefully to all the members who expressed their concern, their expectations, and also raised a number of questions. I'm also happy to say that I heard that it was a call for more feedback, to answer more questions, to work further on this, to analyze further impact, consequences, and so on, taking into account all aspects, for example, the impact on the local situation, and being inclusive, thinking about, of course, what might happen in countries where it's probably more difficult than others. I would like to say that the opening, based on what you said, is even giving more burden on the task force members. I think that a lot of them were expressing questions and so on. And on March 3rd, I will be happy to remind Raj, to remind Franklin, and to remind all of them that we were listening to all of you today. And we have an important task to do, not to finish the work, but to continue the dialogue in a positive way, a transparent way, and so on. I really hope, and it's a call for all the regions, that we will get connected all together to move this subject further, not knowing where we will land. Then my final word is muchas gracias.
Gracias a ti.
Thank you. Thank you, Jack, for sharing your thoughts with us. There is no one else asking for the floor. So I will now try and summarize things to close the meeting of all the things that were mentioned this morning or afternoon or evening, depending on where you are at this moment. At the beginning of this panel, Jack presented the progress made by the task force on the opening of the UPU to the wider postal sector players and some services such as IPS, Postnet Mail, International Financial Service, CDS, Yes.Post, and those which the wider sector might have access at the UPU. He insists that we have to read carefully the report produced by the task force at least 4 or 5 times. You should read it in detail and also exchange ideas with our regulators, with our ministries, in order to have a country position. A lot was said about the types of categories which the new actors would have access to. Some key points that Jack mentioned regarding the stakeholders assigned to the members, the type of members, depending on the type of service, specific rights and obligations, defining the types of members, new members to pay annual fees, projects, on-demand service, market rates, new structure of the executive council, which would replace the councils, and a business council for the affairs of the private sector at the UPU, and the rules to be specified in the proposal submitted to the Congress, and the two-step implementation
with a clearly outlined program of the steps that the countries have to follow. Afterwards, Jorge Andana spoke about the differences that there are in different regions regarding the postal services and the designated operators. In some regions and in some countries, there are designated operators that were never leaders in the postal sectors. He also referred to the monopoly, one country, one post, back in the times when the Universal Postal Union was founded, and after 146 years, if I'm not mistaken, things have changed. Those who spoke about international mail, private operators as agents of delivery, and what we discussed as cargo items, and how this does not go through the designated operator. An important comment was to reflect on the global network. The postal global network will become less and less important, and the UPU would lose relevance if the private actors come in an unorganized way. And each country should have access to quality universal postal services, protecting the rights of consumers. Later on, Walter Tresek spoke about the work done by the UPU Consultative Committee. He clarified that although the documents show that there are 14 members in the council, these 14 members represent hundreds of private companies, and this is something that we really should highlight, because the members of the consultative committee are federations that represent many industries or many sectors of the postal industry in general. He also spoke about raising the rank to the rank of council, and that they have to make decisions both at the POC and in the Council of Administration, which today is a not so visible body and which is not so influential. So he's trying to review the consultative committee role at the UPU, so the opinions are taken into account. Today it is an observer, and it should have no weight in the union. Then Rafael Fresco spoke about the users of the postal service and the importance of the universal postal service and the rights that users have, how to guarantee universal postal service in the global network, and how postal services and delivery services have evolved during the pandemic. These are no longer companies that deliver, but these are platforms that encompass the entire logistics chain so that consumers have a wider range of services, and they are seeking to achieve quality and representation for consumers. Later on, Stuart spoke about the growth of e-commerce and the benefits of marketplace, and that we should all work together in order to have a comprehensive objective both for private and public operators. Franklin from Brazil asked us to review these documents with caution, and that changes should be done with caution, reviewing all the aspects inherent to this reform of the UPU. And he shared with us a whole series of questions that will be made available in the document, very important questions, in order to reflect internally in each of the countries, so that once the document has been read, we have a more solid position to then take to the Council of Administration, both as observer countries or as members. Roberto Cabana, Secretary General of PUAS, informed us that another panels such as this will be held in a couple of months. Raj shared with us the concept that he agrees with the opening of the UPU, but that minimum deadlines should not be imposed in order to achieve this. This is so relevant that no deadlines should be established in that sense. This should be done gradually. And we should not confuse access of the private sector with having members that will find solutions to the financial situation of UPU through selling membership to the private sector. Following that, some of the countries asked for the floor, and it would be repetitive to repeat all these comments. So this is a summary of this first interregional panel. Roberto, would you like to add anything to close this meeting? And I'd like to, before that, express my thanks to the interpreters, the English, French, and Russian languages, and of course, those who do interpretation into Spanish. So thank you once again for your valuable contribution in these international meetings. Roberto, would you like to add anything? Thank you, Gerardo. I'd like to thank all the member countries. Tomorrow, I will be making a more general closing of the meeting. We took note of all the comments and presentations made, of the outstanding comments, and the General Secretary would like to thank you for your words that motivate us to continue organizing these interregional panels where we can have a conversation, not a debate. And I want you all to feel at home, because this is everyone's home. I'd like to thank our moderator, Gerardo, as usual. He's a great moderator. He has always opened up the dialogue. I'd like to make a reflection. These are the moments we have to really have a dialogue in more structured meetings. We don't have these opportunities to reflect and ask the important questions we have. I'd like to thank every one of you. Enjoy your lunch or your dinner or your breakfast, depending on the part of your world where you are. We have to remember that all the regions are present at this meeting. This has been a global meeting. But thank you very much to each one of you for the time you have provided to the postal sector. It is thanks to you, because the interest demonstrated at this moment is the interest and the love for the postal sector and for the work we do. Thank you very much on my behalf. Mr. Moderator, dear Gerardo, my friend, we can now close the meeting for today, unless you would like to add anything else. Thank you very much. No, just once again to thank each of the participants for the interest in participating in this interregional panel. And I'd like to invite you to connect tomorrow at the same time. The panelists will be the restricted unions of the different regions of the world. It will be very interesting to listen to the position of the International Bureau and the candidates to the position of Director General, who tomorrow will be presenting the specific positions, and then we'll have conclusions for the meeting. Thank you very much. Enjoy your evening, your morning, your night, to all of you.
Chao.
Muchas gracias a todos.
Adiós. Chao.
Muchas gracias.
Chao.
Desde Chile, muchas gracias por todo.
Hasta mañana.
Adiós.
Hasta luego, muchas gracias. Upae, Gerardo, panelistas.
Bye bye, take care.
Nos vemos mañana.
Bye bye. Néstor.